at the bottom. Okay. I never record, so I always forget. Okay. I think I'm recording.
I'm getting there. Okay, everyone, I'm just about ready. I had a picture that I wanted to show you, and I was pulling it up and realized that for some reason, the one that I wanted to show you wasn't cropped properly, and it's goofy.
While she's doing that, I am going to, so I only, just so you know, I only have the one video. I don't know which video you wanted to show for clauses maybe, but I have the compound sentences one, but I didn't know which one you were referring to for the other. So I have that pulled up and I can share that one. Or perhaps we don't show a video for that. So hello everyone, sorry we were having a little bit of.
Yes, we were having some funky technical things happening. Okay, so let me start the recording. And welcome back to our Grammar and Mechanics class, Laying the Path, Grammar and Mechanics. I'm Rita, and I'm Rita Savasco, and I'm here with Maura Krzyzanowski. And we are both with Rooted in Language, as you should know if you've gotten everything you needed to link to this class. So thanks to everyone who was brave enough to return. We realized that when we just realized people were just really kind of overwhelmed with getting too much information too soon. As you know, we like to say, no one learns to swim by drowning, and then we have our classes and we have so much information in each session that you're drowning. So trying to do a better job practicing what we preach, we wanted to break this into 3 parts, so the amount of information you take per session is not overwhelming. Yes, it will still be overwhelming.
Yeah. I was gonna say, even still, it is not an example of you know, teaching slowly in bits and pieces and engaging with it with lots of multisensory practice before you then are teaching, you know, a next concept. This class is not really an example of that. We are trying to demonstrate how we teach things for you, but just know, obviously everything's happening in a very, you know, truncated fashion for this class, and the levels that we go through would really be spread out over many weeks and months of teaching. So
right. However, I do, especially for older kids, try to get through levels, pretty much all the levels that we will do, including today. So that's, you know, basically 1 through 6. I try to get through that in the first half of the year, and then really spend time being able to work on that for a long time. But it's sometimes with grammar, it's nice to get all of your building blocks in place, and then spend a lot of time going deeper into that information as you work different sentences. So that can be a little confusing, that we do it a little more this way with grammar than we do other things. Of course, with a very young child, I would not proceed at that rate. But I just wanted to say that because I know a lot of you have older kids. So Claire was reminding everyone that if you're typing in the chat, make sure that you do hit all panelists and attendees so people can see it. And just to remind you again, we work with questions as we go, but if you have a question that's kind of a little more global, put that in the Q&A. Okay, so one of the things I just wanted to clarify is I just wanted to remind you.
Let me just say, though, for those of you who weren't here last week, the Q&A folder should be one of your options when you kind of hover over your screen. There should be a little folder that says Q&A, and you can type content-related questions in there, and those ones are just organized for us to be able to go through at the end, if you were wondering what that is.
If you weren't able to watch part 1 and you are here for part 2 and you haven't taken this class before, many of you are taking it as a repeat, but if you haven't taken this class before, you may feel a little overwhelmed. So last week we did subject plus action verb plus direct object sentence format. We also did subject plus linking verb plus subject complement sentence format. And we pretty much made our way up to subject plus helping verb plus main verb. So I just want to clarify a few things about that as we pick up today. One thing to know is the main verb is the verb that helps indicate whether the entire verb is acting as a linking verb or as a action verb. So let me say that again. To tell if a verb is either linking or action, those are our two main types, you always have to look to the main verb, okay? So on our first example here, we have a helping verb, we have a subject plus a helping verb plus a main verb. This main verb is an action verb, and it's put together, it's now creating an overall functional action verb, if that makes sense. So we have a direct object. She may ask what? A question. Okay? And also, if we want to tell the verb tense, we have to look at the whole verb phrase. Okay? So she may ask a question, is present tense. But what you see here is we have, she has done her work. I wondered if she is ready. She is ready because she has done her work, okay? So done feels past tense. But if you look at the entire verb combination, we have she has is present tense. So she has done is a present tense verb. If I wanted this to be a past tense verb, I would need the helping verb to be past tense. She had done her work. It already happened. And kids can get tripped up by this. And when they do, it is really helpful to kind of, again, give them this visual where to help them see, we have to look at the entire verb combination. And then he will be upset. Be is a linking verb. We're back to the main verb letting us know whether this is going to be action or linking. Future tense, he will be, he equals upset.
I'm going to say one thing here too. So she's kind of talking about making sure that when there's more than one verb, you're intentional about showing that, you know, those verbs are sort of acting like in what we will be referring to later as an entire verb phrase, which is really what's important for the comprehension of what the subject is doing, right? So she kind of separated on that second example out that those verbs are sort of staying together. And while we know that we have a helping verb and a main verb, keeping them kind of linked together will help kids comprehend that as kind of a single understood unit. And you can kind of, depending on what you feel like is more functional for your child, you can start to either keep the squiggling separate, like has gets a squiggle and done gets a squiggle, or you can maybe let kids, if they're starting to recognize those verb units, when there's more than one verb, they might just squiggle the whole thing together. It is two words, therefore it's two verbs, but it is kind of one verb phrase acting with the subject. So you can start to do that too in your marking to kind of help with that idea. It gets tricky once we start layering like this. We had a question that I want to answer verbally. And also, yes, this is a good time if you had some questions, because I know we said for homework to maybe go through and try to do that kind of marking system that we showed you last week on some of those practice sentences that we didn't mark during the class for homework. So if that prompted any questions, we can answer a few before we get started. Vari says, does the verb always directly follow the subject? The answer is no. And you'll see many of examples of that today. And there can be a lot of words in between, which is why really focusing on those function questions of how things are sort of operating or what their jobs are in a sentence will really help you identify the verb that acts with the subject, regardless of where it comes in the sentence. And I try to remind kids of this all the time. We have to really be flexible. It's all about figuring out, you know, what that subject is doing. I don't want you to just look at the next word, because that may not be it. So what is our subject doing? If the next word doesn't answer anything about what the subject's doing, that next word is probably not the verb, right? So you got to really be flexible in that way, and you'll see a lot of examples of that today. Second, she said with a command like stop. What is that word?
We're going to do that today.
That is also, actually, I don't know.
Yeah, we are.
I don't know that we add that part of speech today, though.
You should.
I didn't think that was part of the content we covered today.
To me, that's an imperative.
Yeah.
No, it's an interjection, but it's.
No.
It's acting as an imperative. It's a
I would
command.
say it's an interjection.
It's a command. It's the
Okay.
verb.
Yeah,
Stop. Yeah,
you're
we're going to talk about that
We
today.
will talk about that today. So sorry, I was thinking interjection, which we don't cover today, but yes, imperative is covered today.
I think we talk about interjections next week.
Yes.
Or Friday. Same week. Friday.
Not next week, Friday.
Yeah, right.
Yes, we are
so-
covering imperatives today, so that'll get answered.
So the answer to both those questions is that we're going to talk about them more and be giving more examples of this exact thing. So you are now on page 14 of your instructional guide, and we are beginning level 4. And just something I wanted to tell you, something funny that I think some of the women who are here today had made up in our last class was when you get really frustrated with grammar, you start having a grantrum. And we just love that phrase that, try hard not to have a grantrum, but
a grammar tantrum.
Yes, a grammar tantrum. We all have them. It's okay. Okay. So we're all going to try to have a sense of humor today. It's Tuesday. It's easier to have a sense of humor on Fridays than Tuesdays.
Actually,
So-
Gloria, I think your question is about to be covered on the very first page of what we're doing today.
Yep.
So we'll go
So-
ahead and get started.
Okay. So at the top of page 14, you'll see that we are talking about compounding with coordinating conjunctions. So I have a question for you. When we think of a conjunction is a word that combines. So if kids want to combine, say, two people, they're going to talk about two people doing something. What's the most likely word they will use when they're combining? Yes, and. Okay, so those are conjunctions, and is a conjunction. What do you think are the most common conjunctions that young children use, both verbally and in their writing? And, but.
Or.
Or, yes. And, but, and or. Those are the three most common. You will begin to get so. You get a lot of and so. But that's about, oh, yes, Amy, I don't think you're, oh, she is now. She has it to all panelists. Got it. Initially, she wasn't on all panelists, but she had and, but, or. Those are the most common ones. Those are the ones that I start with, okay? And they're in their verbal language system. So we may begin to just talk about them the way I did with you. If I'm going to think of two pets I like. What are two pets you like? I like dogs, and I like turtles. I like dogs and turtles, okay?
Skipped cats.
Yeah, I skipped cat. I've decided a while ago I don't like cats. I'm giving up on cats. I like them fine. I don't want them as a pet because as cute as they are, I keep getting bad ones. So
We had one very excellent cat.
Yes, we did have one excellent cat, but we didn't pick her. I can't pick a cat. She picked us. We can't pick her. So anyway, so I don't even know if I like turtles. I've never had a turtle, but they seem cool.
Hermit crabs. Those are cool. I would.
They're boring. They're boring. I do know I'm not crazy about fish, but
so cool.
they're pretty to look at if someone else takes care of them. Anyway, so you start with that kind of conversation, and pretty soon you're generating sentences like Rita and Maura like dogs, or Rita likes dogs and turtles, right? Well, I could say for a pet, I want a dog or a turtle. Okay, so you kind of have this kind of conversation. So sometimes I'll do this with peanut butter and jelly. So if I'm going to eat a sandwich with peanut butter, what do people usually put it with? Peanut butter and jelly, right? Then we kind of verbally go into, well, you know what? I like peanut butter or jelly. But actually, I'm not a big peanut butter and jelly sandwich person. Okay, so we can kind of have this conversation, and then I could say, I like peanut butter, but not with jelly. So now I've kind of started to add some complexity to my sentence parts. So let's hope I have enough of these to show you. And what we do is we begin to build with our bugs. And what is great about building with the bugs here, we may begin a binder page that talks about conjunctions. These are the most common conjunctions, or, and, but. And they are used to connect sentence parts together. And we begin to build sentences with this. And we also will, sorry, let me get to this page that I need. We also will add that to our parts of speech.
You guys can
Parts
get
of
out your
speech.
parts of speech.
You remember this? So I would begin to put on, you know, I was going to redraw this because I'm so really bad at, I did such a bad job drawing this for the last class because I did it really fast. My conjunction. Okay. Now, I saw this from someone else, this idea of making the conjunction shaped like a plus sign. Please draw it better than I did. If you have square Post-its, you can cut them out into a plus sign and maybe still have enough sticky in one section of it to get it on there. But we have now learned this other part of speech, and we begin to build some sentences. And Maura's going to show you a video of one of my students. We were summarizing our lesson here, but it will give you a nice picture of the bugs.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. I know it's kind of an upright video. Hopefully I can get some of these things to go away in a second. It was taken on a phone, so sorry about that. Let me make sure my volume's turned all the way up. Yep. All right. Oh, good Lord. There we go.
There. You like the eraser, or you want to just use your hand?
I had a terrible cold during this.
Anna. Mare. Okay, so remember, if there's two of them, whoops, I turned Anna upside down. Right? Okay, now you need
2 bugs.
You need 2 or 1? How many verbs do you have?
1.
Okay, you have 1 verb. Okay, so Anna and Mare want, right? It's got 2 heads. What do they want?
Animals.
All right, we only have 1 bottom left. Okay, so in this one, we have 2 subjects. In this one, we have
2 action.
2 action verbs. In this one, we have
3 direct objects.
3 direct objects.
All right.
Okay, now I just want to tell you, she goes to a homeschool program, a pretty popular one around the country, and they do a lot of learning labels, right? And she knows all her labels, and she has a hard time remembering them from year to year because there's no bucket of a concept to put them in. There's a lot of memorized labels without the concept being really solid. So I'm always working to try to keep up with keeping the concept solid, you know, building a really good conceptual bucket for her to put these labels in. I can't change whether she's going to be always have to label first. I can't change her program. That's something that's going to have to be decided by someone else. But I can support if it's not going to be functional, making it as functional as I can. So we had this conversation, we wrote up some sentences, and then we built some bugs. And, you know, the goal is that now when she has to label, she knows what the heck she's labeling. We of course chose animals because A, it's a good topic, and B, for her, it's her favorite topic. So,
and let me just point out too, bug building wise, we tend to kind of stack things on top of each other that are connected by a conjunction, to show that these aren't words that necessarily are sort of that these are words that are working together or working with a single part. So like we had two heads both working with a single verb, or we had two verbs both working with a single subject head, right? Or you could have two direct objects both coming after a single verb. So we tend to, when we're building bugs, kind of use that vertical stacking to indicate that.
right. And I don't know if it was in that video or not, I forgot to look, but one of the things we do is we often start by circling the conjunction words. So we have these 3 words kids use a lot: and, or, but. They know those. They're pretty solid in their verbal language system. They may still not be making sentences that are grammatically correct. The struggling learner will perhaps not be developing the correct sentences either verbally or in writing, but they mostly have a sense of what that means. So when we're writing it out, we always circle it, and then we begin our analysis understanding that that connector is connecting some part, and we have to find the parts in the sentence that that connector is connecting. So we start with subject, and we look, we see the word, say we see, you know, Anna and Mare, right? So we see the and right there. So we have subject, we look on the left of the and, then we see the and, then we see Mare. Oh, what's that? Oh, guess what? That's still who this sentence is about. So now we know that we are combining subjects, and we start building right away. And the building really helps kids get this just the way you get it pretty quickly. When you just look at those bugs, you get this sense of, and if you notice, I don't put the 2 verbs in a row. I'm not like, if there are 2 verbs, I don't put them like this, because that's what a helping verb, main verb looks like.
That's what I was trying to explain with the vertical stacking.
Wait, there's, I don't know which is my right and left. But anyway, so they need to be vertical because that's, okay, so now, no.
yeah, that was right. That was right.
Is it right? Is it showing correctly for you?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Okay. So you have a subject, 2 verbs, 1 subject, 2 verbs, and that really helps distinguish, especially now. That was a pretty simple sentence, but we're going to get to more complex sentences, as you know, and so this really helps distinguish what is going on.
Showing this on bugs, as sentences start to really reach this complexity, the bug is huge for comprehension, because we have a lot of, if you have a student with any kind of language impairment, the more pieces that are added to a sentence, the more they're likely to really miss what the kernels of the sentence are. So as much bug building as you can do as sentences get more complex, especially for students with comprehension struggle, will be huge.
Okay, so we have some other sentence structures, and I want you to look. So again, we see some kids who are in traditional school, and their grammar programs often, part of the Common Core is they have to know these different intentions of sentences. So sometimes they are called sentence types also. We think of sentence types as being the structure. Sometimes we refer to them as sentence structures or sentence structure types, just to differentiate. But when we're talking about the intention of a sentence, it's somewhat driven by what you would imagine punctuation driving. So the first type of intentional sentence is called a declarative sentence. So you picture a declarative sentence has a period. Okay. Now, there are other kinds too that have periods, but this one also has a period. And this, we're going to show you typically in a declarative sentence, the subject will come before the verb, okay? So we have Sally is visiting her mother, okay? Her is describing mother. Subject Sally, who is it about? What is Sally doing? She is visiting.
You'll notice there that there's kind of one squiggle for both of those verbs to kind of show that, you know, that's the verb unit or the verb phrase, even though we do have two verbs. Yes, we are on page
14
right now.
Okay,
And
level 4, page 14.
he's under where it says teach other sentence structures.
Okay. Okay, so if it's a question, so let me just kind of get this down here. Let me go to my document camera. So we have Sally is visiting mother. Okay. So what happens with a question format, which is called an interrogative, okay, is, first of all, we have some punctuation letting us know. But what we have is we begin to mix our bug up. Is Sally visiting her mother? And it helps kids get that if I am reading this interrogative sentence, which, by the way, I'm not so crazy about making kids memorize this terminology, but it makes for really good word study and it builds in their vocabulary. So, you know, what the heck, go for it if you want to. Okay, is Sally visiting her mother? Now, when I begin to look at question type sentences, I begin to see that I could have verbs that are split up, and I begin to see that the subject may not come first. And that's a really important thing, to have this activity where you take a declarative sentence and you turn it into an interrogative.
And you get kind of a mutated bug.
Okay, now if Sally had a huge argument with her mother and we didn't expect her to have made up already, I might say this with an exclamation mark. Sally is visiting her mother. That's called an exclamatory sentence. And the only thing that's really differentiating that is the exclamation or the tone, right?
That's not really listed on page 14.
It's not listed on here because anything could be exclamatory. You know, sometimes you can have questions that are exclamatory. What was she thinking? Okay. They're both interrogative and exclamatory. Okay. And then we have these, we have the imperative sentence. Okay. And an imperative is like a command. I like to think of the word imperial.
Oh, that is a
I'm
nice
commanding my subjects.
imperial officer.
Okay. Off with your head. Okay. So we have you finish. Oops. Sorry. Your homework. Okay. You please finish your homework. You might throw in please. You finish your homework. Okay. That is an imperative. And so what happens with imperative sentences is, first of all, they tend to be second person. This is a nice time to talk about it. I'm usually, I might say a name, Maura, finish your homework. But I know I got a tone in there. It's like a blast from the past. Like
bringing back my childhood.
Like I ever had to tell you to finish your homework. But anyway.
Still, I never liked it.
More like, Maura, slow down.
You
You do a good job before you go play. Okay, anyway.
Usually would be when you hear the middle name, Maura Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. That's when it goes to exclamatory. Okay. So I could use a name here, third person. It often is second person. I'm just giving a command to the person who is with me. Okay. So because of that, a lot of times we say, we drop this subject. It's an implied subject. It's like hiding. Okay? Finish your homework. And in fact, I might say, sit down. I might say, let's get started. I might say, stop. Okay, so stop is an action. If I say stop, what I'm really saying is, you stop. You stop what? Whatever it is I'm telling you to stop. Okay? Okay? So this is just important to know because, and kids kind of get into this. We kind of call it the implied you, right? The implied subject. And we had a really good idea in the last class. We had some classroom teachers in our last grammar class, and they were, we were all kind of problem solving together, how nice it would be to get really big bugs that kids kind of hold up or wear, and then let them actually move around. So if you know, one child is the subject and another child is a verb, you could decide whether you need a helper child who's going to be a helping verb, right? And then you have another child who's the bug bottom, you know, who gets to be the bug bottom today, all right? Who gets to be in charge, be the subject. Anyway, that what you could do is have kids stand there. And then you could actually like, okay, let's turn this into a question. They kind of have to problem solve together. Well, now you have to stand here and now you have to stand here. And then how do we turn this into a sentence? And then if you have an implied subject, the person who's the subject has to hide behind the verb, right? And so that's the kind of thing you could do where you give sentences and they have really big bugs you can hold up. And then, you know, they can actually move that around or put it on the wall or put it on the floor, right? Okay.
Can I clarify a couple things? One thing about interrogatives that Ashley was asking. So the reason I said mutated for interrogatives is because if you look at that second example there where it says, is Sally visiting her mother? If you're building that on a bug, you end up with a bug body for the word is before the bug head, which is Sally, which happens when you take something that might look declarative. If you had it in the right order to make it into a question, we end up moving one of those verbs in front of the subject. However, I just want to mention that questions sometimes can be in a declarative form, but become questions just because of the punctuation. So you could have had something like Sally is visiting her mother, with a question mark, which is a question, but it didn't end up getting switched. It only became a question because of the what's the word I'm looking for? The intonation, right? That you say it that way because of the punctuation, and therefore it is a question due to intonation. And I also just want to mention that if there are two verbs, only one of them, only the first one or the helping one will go before the subject. And the subject ends up being kind of sandwiched between both of its verbs. So is a helping verb. Sally is your subject. Visiting is the main verb. So you end up.
You would never say, is visiting Sally?
Yeah.
Unless, would that be like a Star Wars character?
I mean,
like
and other languages have different syntax rules that may do something like that, but English does not.
Right.
So she had said on the next page, the question is set up like a declarative on bugs. So she's about to look at some of these examples on page 15. I think you can.
Yes.
We're going to go flip anyway.
Yes, we're turning to 15. So what we have here is we're marking and building some sentences. So we wanted to give you some examples.
Oh, I see your question.
So let me just go to, yes?
She was asking about that second one, Lamont is watching birds. On the bug, it is set up like a declarative instead of like a question. You want to talk about why?
Right. So the reason we did that is when you look at that question, is Lamont watching birds? You have to decide first, what is the subject? So if I have a sentence and I need kids to analyze the sentence and put it on bugs, we are going to put it in the proper order. Lamont is the subject. And then we would do a helping verb, main verb, is watching and then is watching what? The direct object, birds. And notice watching, the main verb is determining this is an action. It's acting as an action verb, these two verbs together. But then once we do that, you kind of like switch it back around again, and you can move is to before. So just so kids get this switching back and forth between when I read a question, can I figure out what the subject and verb is in a sentence? That's a question, because it's not going to be in the order they expect. And for kids who have language weakness, language impairments, language weakness, or English as a second language, I mean, let's face it, they're like learning the grammar of this second language. They're going to be more confused by this because they expect they've like learned one set pattern, and they keep trying to stick with that pattern, because if they go off that pattern, they don't know what they're doing, and they need lots of time building bugs. And I will say in general, my rule of thumb about when am I pulling out bugs and when am I not, whenever I'm teaching a new concept, I teach with bugs. And then whenever I find out we're talking too much, I pull back out bugs again, because I don't want to just be talking. I want kids to be manipulating and figuring it out and working with it. And what I find is that when they're reading and they're beginning to, they kind of start thinking it through differently when they have to start committing it to a bug head and a bug body and a bug bottom. In the last class, we had this big debate, like, do you call it bug butts, bug bottoms, bug behinds?
Whatever words are legal in your household.
Yeah, right. But you know, the butts get better.
It's true.
Excitement.
My
Yeah.
students do like saying bug butt.
So you can see we have an implied you eat your dinner is a great question to give kids and have them try to figure out, like, hey, where's the subject? And a lot of kids will say dinner. It's about dinner. So what is the dinner doing? Like, dinners don't eat, right? They get eaten. So that kind of helps you kind of work through, okay? And Brandy says, must be butts at her house. I Claire. Okay. So did we answer Ashley's question?
I think we did. Basically, yeah, that was all about kind of helping them determine the subject verb. You might want to stick with that format while you build the bug, and then take a look at the sentence again and be like, oh, for the intention of this sentence being a question, does something have to shift, right?
And then I want you to notice the bottom two, we have some compounding of sentence parts. This is different than compound sentences. This is just compounding of sentence parts. The Keisha and Imani will eat the burger. The second to the last one, you see two subjects. We've compounded the subjects. And then Sandy makes cakes, candy, and pudding, the last sentence. It could be or, okay? It could be but not pudding, right? Sandy made cakes, candy, but not pudding. Okay? We haven't actually put the conjunctions in yet. Sometimes I do. I'm about to show you that next. But I find at this point, kids just kind of get the idea. Just generally, this information's in their verbal language system pretty solidly. Even punctuation-wise, this is where you can show them the mechanics of how there's two, and when you get to the third one, you know how we need commas after those. By the way, the Oxford comma's back in again, so you would put a comma after cakes and after candy before the end. You don't have to, but it's back in. So, and I find it's just easier to get kids doing that instead of deciding when they should. So I think this is pretty clear. I think this isn't super hard. Mostly kids like it and they get it. And even teaching punctuation around it isn't too hard for them.
I just wanted to mention that, Wari, your question was answered here. We didn't explicitly bring it back in, but I had gotten my terminology confused earlier. So when she was talking about imperatives, that would answer something like a sentence that appears to be a sentence, but it's just a word like stop. You have that hidden subject. We're really saying you stop. So those kinds of things, we tend to just jump to the verb because, like as Rita said, that subject is, it's like contextual. when you're declaring something to someone, you're looking directly at them generally, so you don't really need that subject. It feels like extra unnecessary information, and so we drop it. But that does technically have a subject and verb, so it can be a sentence, even though it looks like one word.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also,
Tell would have a hidden y'all.
yeah.
Or the plural, my favorite, plural, all y'all. All
Um,
y'all would have to be hidden, okay?
Angela said she wanted to see an example of a compound verb, and I wrote a sentence there for you.
We're actually about to do a compound verb,
Yeah, so you can demonstrate one on bugs.
okay?
Are you on page 16 now?
Yes, I'm on 16. I just wanted to see if one of our short sentences is a compound.
It didn't really, I don't think so. But I had written an example in there like Lamont is watching and waiting.
Yeah.
So he's doing two things that were compounded together.
Yes. So it's Lamont. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Is,
Go ahead and switch your camera so they can see you building it.
well, yes. Don't you like that I'm building it, but I don't show you? Okay. Is watching. This is actually a nice one, Maura, because so let's go ahead and put in what we can do.
I don't know that I would now. I would wait until we do clauses.
I have to on the next one. It's just too complicated. Is watching and waiting.
That was my sentence.
Okay.
So you'll notice you have a helping verb that's helping two main verbs that were compounded by a conjunction.
Yes. And we could have he watches and waits, right? If you don't want your helping verb in there, you have the same thing. Okay. It could be Lamont watches TV and waits
For his mom. That's unfortunately a phrase, though.
Yeah, I know, right? I was
Yeah,
thinking,
it's
I
not-
just realized the same thing.
It's not
waits.
waits mom, yeah. And waits, sure. Watches TV and
He
waits.
watches TV and waits. You just kind of have to like keep track of what if it's he watches and eats. Modern kid who eats in front of the TV.
Eats dinner.
Could be eating a snack.
Oh yes, he could be eating a snack. He watches TV, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll kind of get these, winging out a little bit just to keep it separate.
Yeah, so you can see you kind of have two whole thoughts going on here, which we were getting to.
Now I'm going to have to quickly wash these up because, so what I want you to do is I want you to do the first sentence while I'm cleaning this up. I want you to do the first sentence, is Sandy a good baker? Mark your subject, verb, subject complement, direct object, whichever you think it is, depending on the kind of verb.
And remember last week too, if you think anything is either being a article, adjective, or just or a describing word, you can draw those arrows to show what they're describing. That's another marking we learned. At this point, if you see, do we have any conjunctions on this page? Oh yeah, if you see a conjunction, you're going to circle it. That's going to be our marking for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, subject.
For the first sentence on page 16.
Is Sandy a good baker? What is our subject? Sandy. What is our verb? Is. And that's
Kind of verb.
That's what kind of verb is it? Yes, good point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which means, what do we have after it? And what is it called? And what is it? What sentence type are we going for? Good.
So the word is baker. It's a subject complement. Is that complement a noun or an adjective? And it's a noun. And if you aren't sure, you see those little articles, a, an, or the, that say a noun is coming, a noun is coming. Okay.
What is good?
Good is an adjective describing Baker.
Baker. Very nice.
Not an adjective you would put if I was the subject of that sentence.
It'll be something like
A very inconsistent
functional
Baker.
Baker.
Okay, how about sentence number 2? What is the subject?
We have some disagreement. Some of you are saying it's you. Some of you are saying it's Imani.
So
So
if you're not sure, let's look at the verb. Would
yeah,
you say
that's what
that more?
that's what I say to kids. I say, well, if we have some debate,
Yeah, let's find out what this subject's doing and see if that helps us decide who the subject is. Okay?
so what's the verb?
I like Sandy. Brandy writes, yo, you. Gets the you in there. Oops, I said too fast. So somebody is doing what's the action? Tell.
They already
Right,
said
someone
tell.
already answered. Okay.
So who is telling? Is Imani telling something? No, right? So that, yes, you are telling. So that helps work it out. And I'm glad that's happened because that is exactly how I handle that with students. Is I say, well, let's find sometimes I'll say, subject's a little iffy. Let's find the verb. And then we ask that question. All right, now who's doing that? Who's acting on that verb? Who's doing that action? And then that
what
back to your subject.
Yeah, and someone was asking about this. Let me just zoom in a little. So we always write you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we'll even underline it as well, to indicate it's the subject. You, tell, zigzag the verb, tell the who or what, Imani.
That's not right. Get rid of the direct object marking.
Oh, yes, right, sorry.
Plan.
Tell what? Plan.
To whom?
To whom?
That goes the opposite way. So do the over bracket for that one. Yeah, there you go.
Oh my gosh, so many times. What's hard about that is that the direct object could be a who or a what, and that throws me off every time.
Well, I often tell kids too, the indirect object is often a person. I don't want to say always, but I mean, usually it's a to who type thing going on. So it's often a person. So be careful with the people. They might be indirect. Good job, guys. Did you want to do the big fat
The
example?
bad thing is when I cross that out, it now looks like I'm zigzagging a verb. So
Yeah, well, that's okay.
whiteout tape. All right. Well, anyway.
People shall know.
Okay, they shall know. Okay, so now let me zoom back out again. Okay, now we have our monster sentence.
Somebody just asked if they can do.
Oh, Ming?
No, yeah, the main sentence.
Oh, sure. Do the Ming sentence. Ming is too young. Oh, can you flip your thing over so we don't have competing language?
Oh, sorry. I was trying to hide our
Yeah.
answer. Okay, subject.
Ming.
Verb.
Can you talk again?
The verb, yep. So it is. That's the verb, sorry. Is. Ming is. This is equals. Ming equals, because that's a linking verb. It's acting like an equal sign.
Well, wait a second. I would double check because we know linking verbs can sometimes switch over and be helping verbs. So that's where I tell kids, all right, we see is, let's check and see if we have another action after it or if we don't. So do we
So I
see?
usually go through, actually, start over. The truth is I didn't read this sentence before we started. Okay, the first thing we do is we
Yes.
look for a conjunction. What is the conjunction?
Nice.
Okay, so we circle a conjunction. Once we see the conjunction, we look at everything to the left of the conjunction and we start asking our questions. Who or what is the sentence about?
So they already answered. Ming.
That's
What's the
Ming.
subject is
And then what is
verb.
Ming doing? This is a linking, okay? So Ming equals what? We're looking for a subject complement. So Ming equals, we're just looking now to the left of the and, okay? So Ming equals
Young.
Yang. I'm like so afraid I'm going to make a mistake because whenever I'm on film, this is when I make a mistake. Okay, so now we have to look to the right of the and. And as we progress, you'll know why this matters. But also it matters to have kind of a method for kids because they need to take this in chunks. And so do we. Okay, like I didn't realize till I really started looking at it that, oh, wait, there's an and. I should have noticed that before. It's too hard for kids to kind of like see it all. So when we start with a conjunction and then look at everything to the left of the conjunction first, that helps us. Okay, so now we have to look after the conjunction and we come to this word inexperienced. What is that?
I would say something too, like, what is that telling us? So that they can say something like, and people have already answered because they were kind of well ahead of us.
She's young and inexperienced, right? So
Telling us what Ming is, yeah.
Yes. So this is a little hard to do, but I guess I'll do it like that. And the to decide, this is a phrase, we're just going to bracket that off, okay? So if I was going to build this, I now have Ming is young, inexperienced.
Probably too, we sort of didn't read this one before we started, which is why we kind of kept having to start over, but I might have bracketed off that phrase at the end before we even started.
Yes, I know.
Which is why it's always nice to be prepared. And we weren't planning on doing that one, so it shows you what happens when you are prepared for yourself.
But you know what? I mean, when I'm working with kids, I do stuff like this all the time.
Well,
You know, we're in the middle of it.
Yeah, they bring stuff to you didn't expect, and then you're sort of working.
And then also I say, oops, you know what? I made a mistake. I forgot our first rule, just like I did with you. Our first rule is we look for a conjunction. And if we find one, we circle it. And we go back through what is our process. And here's why. Because otherwise you're reading along and then you start getting tripped up. Okay? All right. So now we are going to move on to our
the word too, he's too young. So remember, ask what it's doing. It's telling us how young he is, which tells us that it is describing the word young. So you can draw an arrow to describing young. Since young was an adjective, that makes to an adverb. We don't put adjectives and adverbs on the bug, at least at this point, but you could write it on kind of the outside margin. So above the word young, you could put it. I don't know if you want to show that. Yeah, oh, there you have it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, someone asked that question, so.
No, it's good. I'm going to be cleaning up my, because I need all the bugs I can get for this monster sentence. So I'm going to be washing them up again. Okay.
Here's our Animal Farm sentence.
Yes. So the first thing we want to look for are conjunctions. Let's go with our rules.
I love the descriptive words in this sentence.
I know. We were talking about how colorful the language is in this book, that we had Clover's
Great foreleg.
And now we have Snowball the
Vivacious pig.
Okay, so let's see if we see any conjunctions. What do you see?
Oh, don't cheat. Try to do it first without cheating.
Okay, so Linda identified but.
Any others? Someone said and but. Yep.
Where's and? I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Speech and. Yeah.
Sorry. Now, I'm going to do what I would do with a student. I'm going to bracket off a few things.
Just bracket off to have. Oh, well, I don't know what you want to bracket.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was just debating that myself. Thank you, Claire. I might bracket that.
Oh yeah, I had that one bracketed. And Van Napoleon. Did you
I
bracket
did that one.
Okay.
Yeah. You see it?
Mm-hmm. I see it.
Okay. So we have to look before the first and. Okay. So we're going to deal with this part of the sentence first. So now bracketing off, if we read this without our brackets, we get Snowball was a more vivacious pig, comma. So one thing we also may circle are our commas, because sometimes, as we know, they could be showing us that this might be a list. It might be a way of compounding. So let's get some of these commas, okay? So if I have Snowball was a more vivacious pig and I see a comma, I'm actually going to stop at the comma. And I'm going to begin, because this is such a monster sentence, it's not unusual that we kind of start building as we go. So what is our subject? Who or what is this about? Okay, so we have Snowball. And do we see a verb? Okay, was. So Snowball was. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to get in a big problem here with space. So I'm going to keep trying to move this over as much as I can. Okay, Snowball
Why don't you just build it underneath? Like
was.
on top of-
I don't actually have a lot. I have more space going horizontally than I do. Okay, he was what? And we know that a noun is coming because we see a. So a is modifying pig, right? And vivacious is modifying pig. And what's more modifying?
Good question. Yeah.
Yes, so he's not just vivacious, man. He is more vivacious. Okay, he's more vivacious than Napoleon. That is a little phrase that we're setting aside for now. Okay, so our comma, I just want you to know, I kind of like forgot to mention that commas, when we talk about lists and working with kids with compounding sentences, and when there are three, we add in commas, we realize that the commas could be taking a place of some conjunctions. It could be taking a place of and. We're not sure, but it could be, okay? So we definitely want to look at our commas. Okay, so Snowball was a pig, and then what's the next thing in our list? Between the comma and we have the word quicker. So what is quicker? Same as pig, okay? So these are both subject complements. So now we know Snowball is a pig and Snowball is quicker.
But yes, guys, adjective, subject, complement.
Yes,
so.
sorry. And
Yeah.
Snowball was pig, quicker, and what? Let's look between the and the comma and the but. We have more inventive. So what's happening now? Why isn't quicker modifying in speech? In speech is actually modifying what is quicker in. Oh, quicker in speech is the question. Why not speech? Well, would Snowball equals speech or Snowball equals quicker? Think about how this is a linking verb that's acting like an equal sign.
Actually, I think the first way you explained it, I think she's saying, why isn't quicker modifying in speech? And you said in speech. Why isn't
It's modifying quicker. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is describing quicker.
How or quicker
how.
where, really. Quicker in his speech.
But we can't say Snowball equals pig, Snowball equals in speech, or Snowball equals speech. We are just describing Snowball here. Snowball is a pig. Snowball is quicker. So again, when you don't know what things are, think about what the meaning is. The meaning will help you as you kind of sort through what could this be doing. And let me just tell you, this is also a little easier as we go. We're throwing big sentences at you because if all you practice are the little ones, you're like, oh, I got this. And then your child writes some monster sentence that has all kinds of grammatical errors. And you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this, right? So we're kind of trying to walk you through this a little bit. But trust me, we all sit around and debate these sentences. When you start pulling sentences from real text, they get crazy fast, quickly. Okay, so now we have what?
Your sentence totally confused me.
I know, they quickly get crazy, was what I was trying to say. Okay, so Snowball was pig quicker. This and kind of helps you. Oh, I have a list going on. Notice this. We have Snowball was a pig, Snowball is quicker, and so you're pretty much guessing by this point. Oh, I bet you the and is going to be another subject complement. And kids kind of can get into this, but they need a lot of guidance, okay? So what's our third complement that's describing Snowball?
I think Michelle had said inventive. Yep, got it.
Sorry, I was too busy trying to fix my bad sentence I gave you.
And what's the word more doing? Just like with vivacious, it's telling us how inventive, more inventive.
Okay, now we have a but. Now, I just have to tell you, I feel at this point it would really behoove us to get a but on something. And what we decided is we were going to put our conjunctions on leaves.
Yeah, but I thought we only used that kind of leave for the other kind of conjunction.
No, I never separated which leaf for what.
Oh, I totally thought we did.
Okay, so now we have Snowball was or is, right? A pig, quicker, and inventive. All right? But now we have to look after our conjunction but. And what do we see right away? Do we see another subject? No, we see a verb, right? And the verb is was. Oops, hey, guess what? I never marked my verb up here. Okay, that's a zigzag in case it doesn't look like one. But wait a minute, was, and then I see not considered. Now, we have a couple choices. We've talked about this before. When you have a negative, it's really, it's an adverb that's modifying the verb. It's not that he was, it's that he was not, okay? But you also, for the sake of clarity, now if a child has a teacher who's a stickler, who's going to give them a test, and they really have to mark verbs, I would never do this. But for functional purposes, if I don't have that worry, I would probably let the child go ahead and zigzag under all of them. But just the understanding that not isn't actually a verb, but it's creating this kind of verb, part of this verb phrase. Okay, was not considered. So now we have but was not. And I had a child who had a great idea. If it's was not, it's a not equal sign.
Yep. Anytime there's a not, I often include that. I know some people don't like this, but I often have my students always include it with the squiggle because if it's next to a verb, I guess, which I think it usually is, because it is so important for the comprehension of that action or that linking. It totally changes the meaning of it, and therefore I always include it with there. So if it was not, you're squiggling that whole thing. If it's did not, I'm squiggling that whole thing, etc.
So we have Snowball was all these things, but was not. Sorry, I tilted it so you got the idea how I kind of try to see if I can get it in here a little better. was not considered. Okay, so this is when you have a Gramtrum. Okay, now let me just tell you, we had about a 15-minute debate about parts of speech in this sentence. And we could go on and on and on about parts of speech. Well, actually, I can't go on and on. I hit a wall. Maura and Tracy could go on and on because you could label many of these things more than one thing. That's why stick with meaning, stick with function. Even if you're not right, even if a grammarian out there would say, no, I don't consider that to be a verb. I consider considered to be, you know, blah, blah, blah. Even if that's true, functionally, we've gotten what we needed out of this sentence. We've understood that this is a list and it's going to need commas. Okay? We can teach that usually when we write a but, especially after a big long sentence like this, kids would have a sense, and I would help them get the sense they need a comma here. And we have now sorted out that this sentence is about who is the subject. Because I have to tell you, if I gave this sentence to one of my high school students, the first thing they would start to think is that this might be about Napoleon. Or they would think everybody liked Snowball, but not Napoleon. Or that Snowball was the better pig. When in fact, the intent of this sentence is that Snowball may be the better politician, but isn't necessarily the one everyone would trust. And that's really important to this story. And it really gives you a sense of how difficult it can be. Okay? We ready to move on?
Linda had a question. We'll be getting into clauses later. I can see what your question is. She's wondering if the comma before the word but is optional because it's...
Probably not, because it followed a list. It would be too confusing without that comma.
I agree. I was going to say, personally, I don't feel like it's optional, but some people might say it is.
I think that this sentence has so many parts.
Oh,
to
sorry,
it.
before the word and. Oh, wait. Is there a comma before the word and?
No, yes, so that's an Oxford.
Oh, there is a comma there?
No, there's not. It's it would be an Oxford comma, and
yeah. That one would be an optional comma before the and or not. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I personally, once again, think it would have helped if it was there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
We are Oxford comma fans.
Yes. Well, this is exactly the kind of situation where you need it. It's a way difficult conversation. Okay, we are about to go to 5.
So yeah, you can stop sharing your screen. Also, I want to just say, we want to remember to have a small break today. So I'm thinking you had said we're going to kind of try to move.
Hey, Maura, would you take a minute to explain really quickly what an Oxford comma is?
Oh, sure. But I just wanted to say, I think our plan is going to be to try to move within the next half hour through level 5 and then take a break before clauses. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, the Oxford comma is something people bring up when you're talking about punctuation around lists. And we know that you have a list when you have 3 or more things that are listed. And the Oxford, I'm going to just go ahead and use this. I feel like we all know what list is.
Define with the word you're defining.
With the word, because I think we're all on board for what a list is. So that would be an example, like if I said, I like apples, oranges, and pears. Okay, and there's this rule about how you can separate the first 2 with a comma, but then if you're adding a third thing or whatever your last thing is, really, I should say, ends up getting tacked on after a conjunction, right? I wouldn't say I like apples, oranges, pears. We tend to throw a conjunction before that last word in the list. The Oxford comma is the debate about whether or not there's a comma before the conjunction. And the Oxford comma is when you do include a comma. I don't know if it has a name if you don't include a comma, but people call it the Oxford comma when you put a comma before that conjunction that adds on your last thing in the list.
Yeah, think of it as an optional comma. So I like apples, comma, oranges, and pears. Whether or not I put a comma after oranges, I like apples, comma, oranges, comma, and pears is considered. Thank you. Claire, thank you.
Oh, Claire did it.
Yes, right. Is optional. Putting it in was called an Oxford comma. I'm assuming because of Oxford rules in mechanics.
And Amy
editing.
said exactly how we feel, which is that I think I agree for clarity. We pretty much always choose the Oxford comma. I teach the Oxford comma to my students. I don't even usually leave it up for debate much. I'm like, and we're going to put a comma here before our conjunction. But if they're bugged by it, it is optional. So.
It goes in and out of fad. And I find that interesting. Right now it's in, and I'm glad, because I found trying to explain to my students when they needed it and when they didn't was more difficult, and just telling them to use it all the time is way easier.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but there was a time when kids would actually get that kind of marked off, even though it shouldn't have been, because it was acceptable. If the teacher was a stickler and didn't like it, they might, give them a hard time about it. But I don't even know if it's a British or American difference.
I honestly just thought it was Oxford comma or not, and you can read all kinds of literature on it, and it's oh yeah, Vari's saying at school it was never allowed. Some schools or teachers will just take a position and be like, this is the rule, right? But I think in terms of the grammar canon that's out there, it is considered optional.
Yeah. So like I said, I think it has gone, in and out of favor. And honestly, it feels like kind of abuse of power to be marking something off that isn't officially wrong just because it bugs you,
Yes, and exactly. So you can get professors who just start marking off every single one because they prefer it this way. And then here you are getting a bad grade for something that's technically optional. I was just know what your professor wants and do it.
But I will say, I find that nowadays, more likely, a teacher will put it in there, not mark off that a child forgot it, but remind them to put it in. That is probably what I think really happens now.
I like how everyone's making up all their own examples. Like bananas, peanut butter, and jelly, and someone else wrote eggs, toast, and orange juice.
Brandy's point is why I like it.
What?
Brandy's sentence there.
What?
Yes, I know. I'm just saying people were just writing different sentences, which were making me laugh.
But it looks like that orange juice is poured over toast.
Ah.
You have the comma between them. Yeah. Like toast and
I
orange juice.
had eggs, toast, and orange juice versus I had eggs, toast, and toast and orange juice. I see. Yeah, like it looks like that goes together.
Yes. Right.
Yep. Clarity. Okay. So we are moving on to level 5, which is page 17. I'm going to be occasionally asking Rita to show you some things on her side, so keep an ear open, Mom, while you're sitting there erasing stuff.
I know, I'm trying to clean my bugs.
We are now moving on to prepositional phrases. I'm going to try to move through this level 5 content relatively quickly. Stop me, though, if you have questions. This tends to be an area that people don't get too tripped up over, even our students. So, on top of 17, sorry, what'd you say?
They just don't always recognize them.
Yeah, they don't always recognize them, but once we kind of explain what they are, it tends to not be that hairy of a concept. So a prepositional phrase is a group of words. So when we use a word like phrase, we tend to be referring to a group of words, not just a single word. And a prepositional phrase always starts with a part of speech called a preposition. A preposition is a part of speech that tends to kind of show some sort of relationship between the things that follow it and another part of the sentence, which isn't a great explanation. So I realize I always say to my students, I'm like, I'm going to kind of tell you what a prepositional phrase is, but you're going to be like, not at all sure until I really show you.
Yeah, and like everything, get it in context and start to work with it, because it is in their oral language system, and kids do tend to write with prepositional phrases very early. So again, that is in our favor.
Yep. And you'll notice too, even with all the sentence examples we had so far, we kept having to move them out of the way because they're just everywhere. So they are very common. Even in like early controlled text, you can have prepositional phrases. So I want you to look kind of almost halfway down the page, not quite, but it says prepositions often indicate, and then there's this list here. So this is kind of basically what I tell students prepositions do, and then I show them. They're often giving us information about place or position, time, how something was done, or kind of a relationship between things, how things relate to each other, sometimes possession, people possessing things, okay? And I tell them that there are like a crap ton of prepositions, and I will give them a list, but I do not expect them to memorize this list, but I have given them a list for reference that we can keep in the language arts binder. If we're ever wondering if something is a preposition, we can kind of check it on that list. I also say this list may not have every single preposition ever on it. It has a lot of the most common ones. But you know, sometimes words can be used as prepositions that aren't quite as typical. So just take this list with a grain of salt. It's a reference list. So actually, Mom, your preposition list, she's not listening to me, is she? Your preposition list is in color, and mine is black and white. So do you have yours nearby? You can.
Oh, wait a minute. I was just going to have Tracy. Sorry. So now I need it.
Not
trying to get something.
No, not your parts of speech list, your preposition list.
Okay. Hold on.
I have the parts of speech list, so I can show that.
Oh,
so
you do?
Yeah, I have it.
Oh, you had the parts of speech list.
I don't have the phrases.
Yeah, okay.
If you guys flip to page 18, this is what we're about to show you. But she's just going to put it on this camera here for you. So you guys have it on page 18. It is a kind of grid here of prepositions. And you'll notice that we have them listed in these kind of quadrants by function. So again, we're back to function. All right? So they tend to be small words, but they're not always. They can be multisyllable, as you'll notice. The ones in the place category look like they are kind of bigger words there. But
and by the way, I'm only going to say this. I'm not really going to explain it. If you've already taken our word study class, these are function words. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We have the word function happening in two different ways here. So we have split them up by how they function in a sentence. And also a preposition would be what is considered a function word, which basically means there's not a lot of content to them. They're hard to define by themselves. It isn't easy for me to explain what a preposition means, which is why that first explanation I gave you was so terrible. Right? Because, you know, they're hard to explain. Mostly they just sort of provide a service in a sentence, and that's why we've split them into their functions. They're just little function words. They don't have a lot of content, but they do have a job, which is to begin giving information about place, begin information about time, begin added information about how something is done, begin added information about relationships between things. Okay, so that's how we've split that up for you here. All right, so now I'm gonna actually, since she already has her document camera, if she has the prepositions or the parts of speech page, no, the parts of speech, I was gonna have them show them. We can go ahead and add preposition to our little parts of speech page here. You don't have to.
I'm juggling.
I can do it. It's fine. So just so you know.
I just realized where I had it. I got it.
Preposition, yep, she has it there for you. Goes right down in between the adjective and adverb. I didn't fill in my conjunction there, but Rita has hers.
Yes,
so
yours will look a lot better than mine. I've got to redo that.
Yeah, whatever. So preposition goes right there. And I'll tell you why.
By the way, preposition is another nice word study word.
Yes. And the reason we kind of put it between, I know I'm talking, so it might be shifting you off of her screen here, but the reason we kind of stick it in this position between the adjective post-it and the adverb post-it is because preposition words begin phrases that act like giant adjectives or giant adverbs. What I mean by that is it creates this kind of group of words that ends up describing or adding information to the other main portions of the sentence in some way. So we can think of prepositional phrases as a big giant adjective or a big giant adverb, depending on what it is they're describing, right? And whether or not something's an adjective or an adverb depends on what it's describing. So with all that being said, I'm going to show you my Rocketbook, and we're going to look at some sentences to kind of clear this up.
Maura, can I show them the phrase page while I still have my document camera on?
Yes, go ahead and do that.
So we have a page like this that Maura sent you today. We are mostly going to be talking more about this on Friday. Today, we are talking about prepositional phrases. Just so you know, we already have a noun and verb phrase. So what we do is we start our building blocks in our LA binders of what kinds of phrases kids now know. And what I do at this point is I just go back and show them that they already understand that there's this group of words that make up a noun phrase. And these are a group of words that have either a subject or a verb, but not both. We're going to talk about that more next week, so don't worry too much. We're going to define it a little better next week. So this has a subject, the old crippled dog, that's a noun phrase. And then we have a verb phrase, it doesn't have a subject. And then now we're introducing them to this prepositional phrase. So they've had 3 types now. We're kind of going back and just telling them, you already saw these types. We don't need to worry about it too much. Because again, it's not super functional to have to be defining those all the time. It's very functional to find your prepositional phrases, okay?
Yeah, I wasn't really listening. Did you explain noun phrase and verb phrase to them?
Yes, I just had a sample of it. So a phrase, just so you know, has either a subject or a verb, but not both.
Yes, I think oh, actually, I may not have said that. Thank you for saying that.
Can have either a subject or a verb, but not both.
Okay, and just to remind you, I'm kind of directing, hopefully you can see my document camera here, but a prepositional phrase is a phrase that begins with a preposition word. And preposition words are those words on the big green chart we gave you that tend to show place, position, time, how something's done, relation, possession. So I have a sentence for you here, which I think is also on your page 17. If you look further down, oh, I kind of skipped one of the sentences that is on there, but the one at the bottom, the woman with a limp went into the park. We will look at this example. So if you want, you can cheat, but I'm going to mark this up for you here, and then I'm going to ask you guys to do this one that you don't have on the bottom. So in this sentence, the woman with a limp went into the park. Who or what is this sentence about? We are talking about the woman. You can either underline the woman, or you can show that the describes woman. Now, going in our typical order, I don't see any conjunctions. So I normally would probably start by having students look for a conjunction. We don't have any of our conjunctions, at least that we've learned so far, in this sentence. So then we're back to looking for the subject. Then I always ask for verb. I try not to go from left to right necessarily, like one word at a time. We always do subject, then we do verb. So what is the woman, what is the action that goes with woman? The woman did what? The woman went. Which tells me now, this is a perfect example of someone asked at the beginning of the class, is that verb always right after the subject? Not here. Not in some of these sentences we're about to be looking at. And we can see here that what the woman did was went. So what is this doing right here? Well, we might have a student, I might say, you know what? We may want to check our list we were just looking at. And sure enough, if you pull out that preposition chart, you will see the word with on there. And this preposition word sort of begins this whole phrase with a limp. And as we've been doing already, our marking system for phrases is always to bracket them, because we're sort of showing that this chunk of words, this group of words, is acting like a single thing. We're kind of grouping it together to become one thing. So we can mark it. This is always fun. Kids like calling them PPs. Prepositional phrase abbreviates to PP, so I might label it that way. And then I also always ask what this prepositional phrase is describing, because we know they are descriptive. That's kind of the job of a prepositional phrase. And what is it telling me more about? A woman with a limp went. The woman with a limp tells me more about which woman I'm talking about. Which woman? It's the woman with a limp. So I can also label prepositional phrases with arrows to show what kind of phrase this is, or what word this phrase is adding information to. So this is not only a prepositional phrase, but because it's adding information to woman, which is a noun, that makes this an adjective, or what we might call an adjectival phrase if you want to get technical. Then we keep going. The woman with a limp went, woman went, and then we have this into the park. Well, is this a prepositional phrase? I don't know. Let's check our list. As we're getting used to them, we might keep referring back to that list. Sure enough, we will find that into is a preposition, which means this is another prepositional phrase. I sometimes have kids tell me too, into, let's see if that's on our list. And in fact, we can ask ourselves, does into give us time information? Is it giving us location information, or where something is, or how something's done? Probably more giving us a place or location info, which tells us where to look on the chart, right? Into the park, we know that's a preposition.
In.
Yeah, I didn't put into. Should have.
Is into not on there?
In is on, but not into.
Oh, it should be. Remember I said earlier, I was giving us a, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a way out by saying this was not an exhaustive list. It certainly isn't. And as
we just write them in as we find them.
Exactly. As we discover them, we write them in. So, for some reason, my camera's kind of tilted here. There we go. So into the park, it's a prepositional phrase. Let's ask ourselves what that's giving us information about. The woman with a limp went into the park. Into the park tells us what? It tells us where she went, making this an adverbial phrase because it's describing a verb. Okay, so I'm going to have you guys do this one that I have a little bit lower here. So my sentence is, the teacher made a mistake on the whiteboard. So scan and double check we don't have any conjunctions. If we did, we'd circle those first, but we don't here. So I'm going to ask you, what is the subject in this sentence? Oh, sorry, we had a question from Nalani I didn't answer. I'll come back to your question in a minute, Nalani. Teacher, very good. Which means that this tells us it's just describing teacher. It's also an adjective article telling us a noun is coming. What did the teacher do? What's our verb? Made, very good, guys. And that's just an action verb, right? We don't. If it's an action verb, though, we can expect, based on the sentence types we've learned, that we often have a what after an action verb. And in fact, we do have one here. What comes after an action? Yep, DO. There's my direct object. Made what? Made a mistake. And what do we have left in this sentence? Yep, PP. I can bracket that off. My preposition is the word on, so everything following is that prepositional phrase. And what is this prepositional phrase describing? What is it telling me more information about? The teacher made a mistake on the whiteboard. Yes, very good. This one is easy or hard because I threw it after a direct object, so it's easy to think it's describing the direct object, but it's actually telling me where the mistake was made. So that makes it adverbial. Sometimes you'll get into arguments, depending on where prepositional phrases are placed. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, is it describing this or is it describing this? What is it giving me information about? And, you know, the conversation is where the meat of the learning happens. So keep that in mind. That was my brain meltdown. Yeah.
Plus, remember, things are almost always adverbs.
Yeah. Not all.
I hate to say it, but after all the debating's over, I just say, that's probably an adverb.
We had an adjective one here, though. I mean, the adjective phrases do have, for sure. Wait a second. Nalani had a question I wanted to make sure I answered. And Valerie, yours as well. So Nalani said, tells us where, but is store an object? Oh, were we looking at one of these sentences for her question?
Yeah. She means park.
Oh, park. Sorry. Oh, I mean park. Is park an object? Okay. I don't really go into this with students unless they ask, but you are noting something. I'm gonna try to use a different color here.
You know what? We have our page on this if you want.
Yeah, I'll have you show. You mean the grammar bugs page?
Yes.
I'll have you show that in a sec, but I'm just gonna mark something here. So in prepositional phrases, you may see other nouns. In fact, you likely will. And we see here into the park, that's a prepositional phrase because it's telling us where she went and it starts with a preposition. But we do have a noun in there. And remember Rita said it could have a noun and a verb, but it won't have both, okay? But this is a noun. It cannot be a direct object though because of that preposition. So you can't, direct objects are only direct because they come directly after verbs without prepositions in the way. As soon as you have a preposition, it has chunked that noun into a phrase. So while you are astute to notice that this is another noun and therefore kind of feels like an object, it isn't an object of the verb, but it is what we call the object of the preposition. So the preposition starts to kind of drive everything once it is present. And so I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but sometimes people will say there's, you know, oh, that's the object of the preposition, meaning it does come directly after that preposition word. And you can kind of think of it as an object of the preposition, but it's not going to be a direct object. It's not ever going to be a DO. That's what we would call something that came directly after that verb without prepositions.
It's directly, not necessarily directly.
Sorry, not necessarily
directly
direct,
related to the verb.
It's being directly acted on, by the verb.
Directly acted on by the verb.
And then we had another good question from Valerie, which I think Rita can do here. She said, can you review, I'm going to move back to my face for a second. Can you review the process, the order in which you ask the questions to analyze the sentence?
So if we were building, I have it here. If we were building this sentence, the first thing we would look for is we first look, do we see any conjunctions? There weren't any. Then we look to see who or what is the subject about or sentence about. That's our subject. And then what is the subject doing? What is the woman doing? She went. Okay. So I usually start out, I've been cleaning these off, so I have purple fingers here, but I usually will bracket off prepositions for kids when I'm first teaching it. And then we will we'll take one of those phrases and we will begin to identify that they are in fact prepositional words that are creating prepositional phrases, and we'll write our prepositional phrases on wings.
Yay, bug wings.
Okay. And what we like about this, and this goes back to how the bugs can help diagram something in a way that's not too chopped up so kids can understand what's going on. You know, if you were diagramming this prepositional phrase, you'd have 3 little lines going each with these 3 words on it, right? But instead, this is a unit. This is a functional unit that has a job of describing. So one of the things that I had read, and I find it very helpful for me, is that if a prepositional phrase is immediately after the subject, it's probably describing the subject. And it probably is giving some information about more about that particular subject. So you could actually argue, well, she went with a limp, right? But she is the one with the limp. And again, its position, that prepositional phrase's position of right after the subject is helpful to me. And then into the park says where she went. And that's acting as describing the verb. And again, if they said, but the woman is in the park, have the debate. It's okay. What I really love about this is what they know is that this is a describing phrase and that it's not the subject and verb. And then also usually in the end I say, well, if we're not sure, it's probably an adverb. I might have made a mistake, but 9 times out of 10 now I'm right. So that's just really helpful to me. And kids like that too. But the thing is, what do they understand? They understand this tells us where, and this is describing more about the woman. So I comprehend the meaning of this sentence.
All right, I'm going to show you something.
Okay. I was just going to show you this on the page.
Yep.
This is in Bugs 3, page 16. For those of you who have it, this is the kind of thing you can use to kind of explain what's going on in a prepositional phrase, that you'll have the preposition and it may have an object of the preposition. That object may have modifiers. So let's look at our 2 prepositional phrases. With a limp, with is the preposition, limp is the object of the preposition, modifies limp. Okay? I hear whispering by Tracy and Claire, and I think, did I say something wrong? Okay, then we have into the park. Into is the preposition. Park is the object of the preposition, and the modifies park. So we don't really actually mark modifiers. We just keep them together on wings because this is more functional. But if you're talking about prepositional phrases and objects of the preposition, then this is helpful. Okay? And then we have an example in Bugs, and we have sentences for you to work on in Bugs. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to show you something on my screen real quick. I think this was Vari's question. So what I've listed for you here, and you guys can take a snapshot of your screen if you need to, but this is the kind of the order of which I was going through those sentences at this point.
Or can you pull it down a little bit? It's just a little glary at the top. Pull it down.
Pull it like that?
Yeah, a little lower.
You see the whole
Okay,
thing?
great. It's just easier to see.
Okay. So what I did first was I always scan for conjunctions. As soon as we've introduced conjunctions, we're kind of looking for them, and you'll see why when we get to level 6, how important that is. So we scan for conjunctions. If we see any, we circle them, and we sort of deal with what comes after. We sort of deal with everything that comes before the conjunction first.
We may also notice and circle our commas.
Yeah.
I'm just finding that more and more as we deal with bigger and bigger sentences in our literature, we need to kind of look at commas too. And Claire is actually the one who first pointed this out to me. I was like,
yeah, I often have kids circle punctuation that comes up in the middle of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So then number 2 was I find the subject, which is kind of this question of who or what is the sentence about.
I'm with you there.
And then we find the verb, which is this question of what is the subject doing. Your verb will kind of determine what you may have after a verb. So if it's an action verb, or if it was helping verb, main verb, you may have a direct object. If it was a linking verb, you may have a subject complement. Okay, so then we would label those things. And then number 5 was that we're bracketing phrases. So we see if we feel like we have this kind of group of information that's all working to describe. So I might say something like, what is this phrase telling us or describing? And we decide if it is acting like an adverb to describe to give us information about a verb, or acting like an adjective to give us more information about a noun, and we draw arrows to do that. So I'm going to kind of push this up just a little bit. I know you said there was a glare at the top, but just so we can go through this sentence. So scanning, do I have any conjunctions? So far we've only really covered and, but, and or, maybe so. I don't see any of those words, so clear to go. Find our subject. The woman with the mug drank her tea after me. So who or what is the sentence about? What is this woman doing? The woman did what? Drank. All right, now I notice we have kind of a, so that would tell me too, I have a what kind of verb? An action verb. Do I have something that answers the question of drank what? Because action verbs often have direct objects. Why, yes, I do. Her tea. Her describes tea. Okay, so now we have these kind of groups of words, so let's check those out. Is with a preposition? Yes, it is. So that means with the mug is a prepositional phrase. This is what's called an object of the preposition. What is with the mug telling me more about? Or what is it describing? Well, it's telling me which woman I'm talking about. So right there, prepositional phrase. We could also call it an adjective. And do we have another phrase? Well, we have this after me is after a preposition. We could check our list. Yes, it is. After, if you look on our list, is giving us information about place or actually when. It's giving us information. It could be place, but it's always when. It's giving me information about time or when something happened, and that tends to be describing a verb. So let's check. After me tells me when she drank it. So it's definitely a preposition, and it is acting like a giant adverb, or also known as an adverbial phrase. Boom. So that's kind of our order. All right. I'm gonna have you guys flip. Rita showed you that we use bugs, wings to show phrases, and we place the wing on whichever portion of the bug it is describing. So you can flip past page 18 to page 19. I'm going to teach you real quick.
We're going to do this quickly now that you understand prepositional phrases.
Yeah.
I will have bug pages up for you to look at during our break. Okay?
Good idea.
We are way off time, Maura, so we'll kind of move this part along. This is not so bad once you understand prepositional phrases.
Okay. I want to remind you, if you look at the top, it says that we're teaching something called a locative complement. And I just realized I have my bug parts all out of order here. Okay, so I want to remind you of the sentence type that we learned last week. Oh yeah, I do have a glare right there. My thing keeps...
And the page I am showing is ignoring the top one. That's just an example of a subject complement. So we're looking at these two. Maura is going to be giving you examples just so you know this is in Bugs 3. Did you want to say something to me?
Okay. Can you guys see my page here? So I am reminding you of this verb, or sorry, sentence type that we learned last week. I guess it was last week on Friday, of subject plus linking verb plus subject complements. And you remember subject complements can be adjectives or they can be nouns. Okay. We have a similar sentence type that starts the same way with a subject and a linking verb, but sometimes what kind of falls in the subject complement slot is what we call a locative complement, which I'm just going to abbreviate here to LC, which is kind of a subject complement-esque word, but it's always giving some kind of location information.
Think of locative, location.
Yep.
Your word study
Word
skills.
study there, yes.
Mhm.
So linking verbs connect the subject to a complement, and that complement is always describing the subject. So that's what makes something a subject complement. It can kind of replace the subject, if you will. A locative appears to come in the same spot, so it is a similar format, and it does also follow linking verbs, but it can't technically really replace the subject because it's more giving information about kind of where your subject is. So if you look about halfway down your page, it says that locative complements occur when a word or phrase follows a linking verb and is acting like an adverb, but it's always answering that question of where. So it gives you a couple examples there. Kanika was home. This feels like subject, linking verb, subject complement, except that it's not home equals Kanika, because we're not saying that Kanika and home are kind of the same thing. It is coming after a linking verb, but it's answering this question of where. It's giving me a location. And if you have a word that does that, we tend to mark it with, instead of the dot and the connection, we only put the dot on the subject, and we draw an arrow that rests right above the locative complement at LC here, showing that this is like the direction Kanika was going. She is wherever this locative complement tells us, home. Okay, so another example would be the car is. So I like this example because it's kind of layering on our elements we've learned so far. I'm gonna run out of space. Street. Okay, so this tells us, here's our subject. Here's, again, we have a linking verb, but now we have a prepositional phrase. Down can be a preposition. It's giving us information about place, which I think was one of our functions a preposition can take. Down the street is a phrase that's now both a prepositional phrase, but also kind of a locative complement, because it came after a linking verb and it's telling us where the subject is. So you can kind of mark it like that with your brackets, and you could also, probably should have done this below, mark it with your little locative complement marking to show, yeah, it's a prepositional phrase and it's a where. And anytime anytime a prepositional phrase tells us where, that means it's also always an adverb, I believe, because it's telling us where the car is. It's really giving us more information about the is.
Okay, can we move to sentence practice? Page 20.
Oh, I guess I didn't need to stop sharing my screen, did I? Well, I'll stop for a minute. I'm going to have you guys do a little bit of marking.
Mhm.
So I'm going to have you guys try this first one. Lamont is in the yard with the birds. Keep in mind, we now have some kind of stacking.
That's actually the second sentence on the page.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was it's the first one. I
Okay.
had marked. The
Lamont.
second sentence on the page. Lamont is in the yard with the birds. And I'm going to have you go ahead and try to mark that yourselves. And remember, we now have some stacking elements. You can have something that's both a phrase and like a locative complement or something like that. Okay, this happens a lot in grammar. You can have these elements that can really be labeled both ways because they are functionally doing two things.
Right. The prepositional phrases might be acting as locatives. They might be just describing.
And well, it's just like the same way as we said prepositional phrases, are acting like a giant adjective or a giant adverb. If they can act like one word, they could often be called another sentence component because they're kind of acting like a single thing. Okay, marking up that sentence.
Do you want to show it?
You want me to rewrite it or just show it on my paper? I already marked it on my paper, so I'm going to write it.
So meanwhile, what's the subject? Right? What's the verb? So how many prepositional phrases do you see? 2. So the first one is in the yard. And the second one is with the birds. Okay, so they got you all set up here.
Very nice.
So we underline our subject, we zigzag our verb. Is it a locative complement or a subject complement? Locative complement. And in the yard tells you where.
In the
with-
yard tells us where Lamont is.
right?
With the birds tells us what?
With what? Right.
With what? That I don't know.
It is describing something. So I don't think he is just with the birds. He's
This one is tough. I think this one's tough.
that's a really bad question. Well, here's one of those things. Where are you going to put that wing on the bug?
Is it telling us
I
more?
probably would have put it with yard, but I'm often wrong. So
I think it tells us, like, well, it tells us who he's with.
well, in truth, you put the 2 wings on is probably, or you could put that wing on another wing. I better show you this one.
I think it's kind of a wing on a wing. That will be
I
my
think
guess.
you're right. I'm going to show you this one.
I don't know if Tracy disagrees, but that's what it feels like to
Are you
me.
crazy? She's debating. She's making her debating face. So meanwhile, I will.
It's not telling us where he is or how he does something. It's not describing Lamont. So I think it has to be describing the other phrase.
But it is describing. He is with the birds. Lamont is with the birds.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's where.
Yeah.
it's a where. You're right. It's also an is. I think Claire's right. What's that, Claire?
Success.
We're very competitive.
Where he is. He's with birds. The thing about with is it could be telling you a where, but it could also be telling you more about a noun.
So
That's a hard one. Like in a previous sentence, we had the woman with the mug or something like that.
So, you know, you could, it's got like a really long little wing here, or they're both on is. So you could, I think this is again a good debate, right? Mostly in the midst of that debate. I mean, again, going with our, it's probably an adverb rule, you know, but an adverb can describe an adjective.
Yeah, people have some good
Acting as an
questions.
adjective. So either way, that's our adverb rule. So that didn't help me.
People have some good questions about in the yard is definitely a locative complement, and if we're also saying with the verbs is telling us where he is, he's with the verbs, and that would be another
Mm-hmm.
locative. Right?
Because if we, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you can do
So-
that. I have no idea. I guess you
Would
can.
there be a comma separating the phrases? No, there would not be likely a comma.
Do we want to do one more or skip right to the big one?
I think we need to skip to the big one because we need to get a bathroom break.
Okay.
And we have clauses to come.
Just so you guys know, you'll notice on my sheet, I know I have glares. Ugh, let's see if I can.
Just so you know, also while she's getting ready, on page 10 of Bugs 3, we have a nice sheet that has all 4 sentence types now, including the locative complement in there and examples of each one. Okay.
You know what I realized? I think the glare is only on the section I'm not having you guys look at. So what I want you to do is
Yeah,
on
it is more. They're good.
on page 20 on the bottom for our Animal Farm quote, go ahead and cross out this section that I crossed out. Breakfast was an hour later. It's a very complex construction that we would prefer to sort of not debate that now. If you are very curious about how that would be marked, you can try it on your own and we can maybe answer those questions.
We could talk about it in the rooted community.
Talk about it in the rooted community and or at the beginning of next week's class, but I'm skipping
And
it.
then Maura and Tracy can give you their theories.
We had a lively debate. Yeah, it's a tough one. Okay, so we're starting with Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of Mrs. Jones's and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. Okay, and I'm gonna help you guys kind of go through the order again of how we would mark. So actually the first thing I would do, which is easy to forget, but I would oh wait, no I wouldn't, because now you understand prepositional phrases. So that's
You still might bracket them, but yes.
well, I'm gonna have them find them is my point. I'm not gonna do
Oh,
it.
I get it.
So I will have you scan though and see if you see any conjunctions. And if you see one, let me know.
And circle them.
And circle it on your own paper. Michelle says she sees the word and. I assume it's this. Doo-doo.
2 ands.
Oh yeah, we do have 2 ands. And. So that would be a good indication that we may want to just first try to deal with everything before the first conjunction. So now we go to subject and verb. So what do you think is the subject of this sentence? Good job, guys. Snowball. That's the who or what. So what is our subject doing?
What's Snowball doing? Good old Snowball, our vivacious pig.
Oh yeah, Snowball's a pig. See, I find the name Snowball confusing for a pig, but had found. Good job, guys. Good of you for noticing. I'm just gonna do one big zigzag across the whole thing, but we do have that helping verb giving some tense. Main verb there. All right. So now we have found the subject.
Notice the main verb will indicate whether it's going to be an action verb or linking verb, whether
Yeah.
it's acting in that way, okay?
And I want you to notice too that if we have a, if we look at our main verb and we notice that it is action, which by the way, found, that's a thing that's an action to find something, then we may want to look for a direct object. So what had Snowball found? Yep, I think I see someone said that. Good job. And now that should answer a couple other questions for some of these words too, because what is green doing? Adjective describing tablecloth. What about old? Adjective. I don't really have the arrow, but it's also describing tablecloth, right? All right, cool. Now we're gonna.
Anne is saying, noun is coming, a noun is coming.
And now we are going to check out some of those other things we have before this first conjunction. So do you see any phrases? And if so, what are they?
Bracket them off even if you don't know what they are yet.
True.
So in the harness room.
Any others?
So we're still looking before the conjunction.
We're looking before this
Of
first
Mrs.
conjunction.
Jones. Yeah, they got it. Of Mrs. Jones's.
Yep, I see it. Okay.
Just before you go on and identify, just notice this is an example of a lot of words before the direct object. You know, this is tough for kids. To find the direct object here can be tough for them. They may have had to bracket off in the harness room and identify that as a phrase, a prepositional phrase, in order to realize that what she found was the tablecloth, not the room.
And also the questions can help. Found what?
Mm-hmm.
Did he find the harness room? Oh no, wait, that's where he found.
In the harm. Yeah, that's where, right? So again, the meaning can help drive. It's funny, the meaning will drive the grammar will drive the meaning. It goes back and forth. So that's why we end up in these debates.
Sometimes I spend time marking what the prepositional phrases do, and other times I just kind of let us bracket and move on. Do we want to oh, Claire wrote a big old thing. Okay, sorry, that wasn't a question, just checking. Of Mrs. Jones's. Okay, so yes, of Mrs. Jones's tells us whose tablecloth. In the harness room tells us what?
Where?
Where? Yeah. Where you found.
Mhm.
Okay. Now we can check out everything after the and. And so Snowball had found, let's look at our main parts here, skipping phrases. Snowball had found an old green tablecloth and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. So let's look at had painted on it a hoof. What is one of our main pieces? Do we have another subject, by the way? Is this and connecting more than one subject, or is it connecting more than one verb? Yep, I see a dual verb going on. What is the verb? Had painted. And I think some of you had already noticed, and I see some of you had mentioned earlier that we do have a phrase here on it. Okay, and because our main verb is an action verb, we can look for a direct object. We might have one. Had painted what? UDO, I see. Yep, hoof. And we have a compounding word, a conjunction. So that tells us that we might have two things being combined, probably direct objects because it's right between this direct object, hoof and horn. Here we have these little, and now it's coming, words. And then what is in white? Yep. Yes, you are correct, Michelle. In is a very common preposition. That's a nice clue there. Prepositional phrase. And what is in white giving us information about? Yeah, painted the horn. How, to me, in white tells me how you painted it.
Good golly.
But it could maybe be describing the horn. To me, it feels like a how because of the in. How you painted. Does Tracy agree before I mark that?
Yeah, I think it describes horn and hoof.
You think it describes horn?
And
Uh-huh.
hoof.
Oh, sorry, hoof. Horn and hoof. To me, it feels like how it was painted in white.
That's true. It could be a universal phrase that describes that whole.
Yes.
Threw arrows to everything then.
Here.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So true.
Glenn.
That is a thing.
Is it really? I don't know that I knew that.
Yeah, it is.
A universal phrase.
Mhm.
Well, there you go. If we weren't complicated enough. Horn and yeah, the horn and the hoof were both painted in white. So if it's describing horn, it's also describing hoof because that was a compound direct object.
Or that's how they were
It
painted.
doesn't necessarily read that way.
Or that's how they were painted. Yeah, it depends on how you read it.
Exactly, it does.
It really does. Yeah. And that's why I said there's a lot of debate over the is it an adjective, is it an adverb, what is the preposition?
Brandy said, I'm just going to call everything a universal phrase. I like that idea.
Oh,
That's the spirit.
yeah, sure.
All right, bathroom break. Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, so 3:10.
And we are about to talk about independent clauses. We'll be coming to page 21. Okay.
All right, good job, guys. Thanks for hanging on so far.
and fun.
Okay, I think we're back. Yeah, are you back, Maura?
The words receive so much negative.
I'm here.
Okay,
Okay, it looks like you have
I ate some.
questions in the chat.
Son, oh no. One question was, how long is the break?
Oh, I had
Till
said
now.
5 minutes, I thought.
I did say.
So
So bring a cookie for Keisha.
I wanted
He's
to,
asking, where would you put that prepositional phrase for
oh,
Keisha?
where would you put it? I thought she was asking how would you mark it in terms of its function.
How do you mark the prepositional phrase for Keisha in terms of its function, which is the same as where would you put the wing, right?
Yeah, like, oh, yeah, where would you put the wing? What about in the street in the next sentence? What page are you on? Are you on the practice?
This is on the ones that you were doing. 20.
Did Kanika park her car in the street? That tells you where she parked. So that is describing the verb, which makes it an adverb.
Cookie for Keisha is similar to bring Keisha a cookie, right? Does that
Yeah.
help you?
Well, that just would be an indirect object in that
Yes,
sense.
I know.
Here it's a prepositional phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to direct her.
It's how you're modifying bring.
Yes, that's what I had said.
Okay. That's why I said, did it help if you switched it around? Because if you say bring Keisha a cookie, you get a little more that you're bringing, that it's modifying bringing. That
I
was,
was trying to find, I thought Tracy had written somewhere on one of these pages the questions that tend to direct you to whether it's an adverb versus the questions that tend to direct you to whether it's an adjective.
I think that is actually in Bugs.
Oh, it's in the grammar bugs
Mm-hmm.
curriculum. All right.
Right.
Sorry. I thought it
Okay.
was
I'll
in
see
there.
if we find it. We'll try to locate that and let you know.
Which one?
It should be in.
No, I'm saying which questions are for adjectives.
Like you had written on one of the grammar bugs.
Oh, can you type those in? Answer.
I can. I mean,
Tracy's gonna type in the questions.
okay.
I don't know if you actually started or you're just trying.
No, we're ready to go. Okay. So
I know
let's get started. We are on page 21. We are going to do level 6, which is our last level for today. However, it's a bit of a monster. So when I said in the beginning that I like to spend the first half of the year getting through levels, I was talking 1 through 6. So basically what we've taught in these first 2 classes are what I like to get to in the first half of the year if I can. I mean, kids are really confused. Obviously, I'm not going to plow along. But what I've learned with older kids is I almost can skip to what is a clause and a dependent versus independent clause, just talking about subject, verb, and clause, and then go back and fill in the sentence types because it gets me much quicker to being able to edit their own writing. So in truth, what we're about to talk about now is pretty much primary, one of the most functional aspects of grammar. So a clause, the definition of a clause is it has a subject plus a verb. So if you remember, I said before, a phrase has can have either a subject or a verb, but it doesn't have both. A clause has both. So basically think of a clause as a sentence. Now, it might not be a complete sentence, but it is a sentence. A clause can either be a whole complete thought or an incomplete thought, which we like to refer to as half a thought. Okay? If the clause is a whole thought, it is an independent clause. Okay? It can stand alone. It makes sense. It's a complete thought. And we represent that with this whole circle. Okay? If a clause is not a complete thought,
We are starting level 6, page 21. People were asking where we are. Sorry.
Sorry, I said level 6, but I didn't say the page number. Sorry about that. So this is from Bugs 2, page 5 is what I'm showing you right now on my document camera. So if we do not have a complete thought, we can think of that as like half a thought and represent it with this half circle, which very conveniently looks like a D, harkens to the D in dependent clause. So basically, every sentence to be a sentence has to be a whole independent thought, or it has to have a whole independent thought, and it can have dependent thoughts connected to it. So don't freak. We're going to go through this a little at a time, but I just want you to understand if you have a subject and verb, you have what's called a clause. If that clause is a whole thought, we call it independent. We're going to start with independent clauses. Okay? So that was from Bugs 2. And again, this is the kind of thing that you could have kids draw in their LA binder. We have little inklings to give you an inkling that this is a good thing to put in there. Okay? On page 25, you have a page that looks somewhat like this, only we realized we updated this a little bit and we didn't get you the updated version.
We just added the circle.
So what we did is we just added the circles. And you can have kids draw these in. So we're just really at this point going to look at this side of it. Okay? So I say to kids, we've already talked about some conjunctions and what conjunctions do. And we may review that. Okay? There are conjunctions that connect independent clauses. They just don't connect parts of sentences. They connect whole sentences. And those conjunctions include the ones we've already talked about. It includes and includes but, and includes or. But it also includes some of these other words. And the way we help ourselves remember these words is with an acronym, Fanboys. So we read them together: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay, and I say to kids, do you ever use for to combine two sentences? Like if I wanted to say, I like peanut butter, I like jelly, could you think of a way to use for? Usually they say no. And the truth is not very many kids use for as a conjunction for independent clauses. And I really actually don't worry about it much more than acknowledging that we don't use it very often. It will show up one day in the literature, then we can find it and go, oh, there's an example of it. What does it mean? How did the writer use it? And so on. Okay. Sometimes kids will ask me for an example. A lot of times they're like, just glad they don't have to worry about it. Okay. So, and I might say, I like peanut butter and I like jelly. And then I ask them if they know what nor means. A lot of kids really struggle with this. They know it's a negative usually. I might say, I kind of have to have two negatives. I don't like peanut butter, nor do I like jelly. But we've already had this example. I like peanut butter, but I don't like it with jelly. Or I like either peanut butter or jelly on my sandwich. Or I like jelly on my sandwich. I'm trying to combine two complete sentences. I like peanut butter, yet I don't like it with jelly.
Make sure you're telling people when you show pages, what pages you're showing them, because people, we had flipped from page 21 to 25. You're showing
Sorry
them
about that.
page 25, so.
I was just trying to move on and I forgot. Okay. And then so, I like peanut butter, but I don't like jelly. So I never have those two together. So we give some examples. We'll use our animals again, our peanut butter and jelly again. And again, I'm using their verbal language system to kind of help get them tuned into the fact that they know a lot of these words. They use a lot of them. There's a few they don't use very often. Usually we'll identify what are the ones you're most likely to use, what are the ones, and what are the ones do you not use. Usually they will mark and, but, or, so, as we discussed. And I'll say, and we're going to work on using yet more because I like yet.
For is kind of old-fashioned.
Or is kind of old-fashioned,
As a
nor
conjunction.
is just a little tricky. We have to be just the right circumstances to use nor. Okay? And so you can take this page and you can create it in the LA Binder, or you can cut it in half or fold it in half and just be working with this side of it for now. Okay? Okay. So as I said, an independent clause contains a subject and a verb. It conveys a whole thought. And if we put two independent clauses together, we get what's called a compound sentence. So we have an example on your paper there. Jermaine was on his bike. Tracy's laughing.
Sorry, not at you.
Oh, good. So he did not hear his mother. Let's start over. The very first thing we do when we look at that sentence, Jermaine was on his bike, so he did not hear his mother, is circle what?
She's on the sentence in the middle.
Conjunction, coordinating
of the
conjunction.
Yep.
So we identify, we are going to use our chart to make sure we think so is a conjunction. Is it in fact a coordinating conjunction? Yes, it is. Okay. And we put that on a leaf. So, okay. So now we're looking at everything to the left of the conjunction. Jermaine was on his bike. And we have already, you could just identify subject verb. If you have an older student and you're like, yes, this is where I need to go, and I'm not going to yet go into all the different sentence types. I'm not going to go into prepositional phrases yet. I just want subject verbs. You can stop right here. We have a subject verb. This is a clause. Is it a whole thought or half a thought? Well, doesn't really work, does it? Till we add our on his bike.
Now it's a whole thought.
Now it's a whole thought. Jermaine was on his bike. So he did not hear his mother.
We have a new subject.
He did not hear what or who? Okay. Jermaine was on his bike. Complete thought. He did not hear his mother is another complete thought. So is coordinating two complete independent clauses. This is a compound sentence. Instead of compounding a subject or just compounding a verb or just compounding an object, what we did instead is now we're compounding two sentences. And what we want kids to see, that's at the bottom of their chart here, is that if you have two independent clauses, your punctuation choices are a period in between them, a semicolon in between them, or a comma and coordinating conjunction. So if I had to put a comma in this sentence, according to my chart, the comma would go right here. Now, usually we don't put commas on bugs. What we do instead is we have them on a marker table or marker board, and we'll put commas right on the marker board. Okay? Okay? So I just want you to notice on that, it says, remember your coordinating conjunctions are on page 23. It's really 25. We did list them all here.
Yeah, that little box at the bottom of page 21 should say see page 25 if you want to make that edit.
Right. So what we can do is mark and build sentences. And Maura, maybe you can give the list here. Maybe you can type this in or write it down as we go. So what we're doing, we're on page 22 now.
What do you want me to type? Sorry.
So we're on page 22 and we have this sentence, Lee got a puppy, so his sister got a kitten. Okay? The very first thing we always do is circle any conjunctions. I think we've said that a lot, right? If there is in the text any punctuation within that sentence, we also circle that. We look before the conjunction and see, is there a subject and is there a verb? Once we identify there is both a subject and a verb, in this case, it is Lee got, then we say, that is a clause. I always say, do we have a clause? Is there a subject and verb? Do we have a clause? Once we have a clause, we ask ourselves, is it a whole thought or half a thought? And if it is a whole thought, we will identify that whole thought as independent. And the way we do that, I'm going to switch back to our camera, is we use a log. We put our bugs on a log, and I have kids write independent. And we work on saying and chunking and spelling that using strategies that we talk about in our phonics and spelling and word study. And then once we identify that is independent, we look after the conjunction. And the sentence, I have two different sentences I'm talking about here. This is the example I did before that I have on the document camera. On page 22, we're looking at this sentence, Lee got a puppy, so his sister got a kitten. Okay.
Oh, sorry. So on your screen, you're looking at a sentence from page 21, but verbally you're talking about a sentence on page 22.
Right. So what we're doing, okay, you want me to change it?
Yeah, so that it's matching.
Lee got puppy. Okay, we've identified that's independent. We have our coordinating conjunction. So now we look after the coordinating conjunction and we do the same thing. We're looking for a subject and a verb. Lee got a puppy, so his sister got This is one of those families where every child has to be equal. They can't share the puppy. A kitten. And then we ask ourselves, his sister got a kitten. Is that a whole thought or half a thought? It's a whole thought, so we mark it again, independent. Okay, we work on spelling it, we work on saying it. I have kids write this a lot in the beginning. Eventually, I'll let them just put an I or D on the log, but I want them learning the vocabulary, so initially they write it out. They may also have some logs they've already written on independent, and they can put them up there, okay? And then what we do is we write out the pattern So I need my, sorry. Ah, things are falling. We write out the pattern. So we have an independent, coordinating conjunction, independent. We look at our list and we identify where the punctuation should be. Okay? So we write out the pattern and we check the punctuation with the chart. And what I'd like you to do is write me an independent, coordinating conjunction, independent sentence.
Independent, comma, coordinating conjunction.
Comma, coordinating conjunction, independent sentence. They have to be two whole thoughts combined. And we create a lot of these together with kids. We have them practice it.
I like your sentence, Linda. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and type it, that's great because it's good for us to look. She says, I want to avoid grammar, comma, but I know I can't.
Perfect.
She actually has a slightly more complex sentence there, but.
Yes, she does. But we're not going to talk about that right now.
I'm not even going to talk about it. Yeah.
We'll get there, but not yet.
I hate durian and I never want to eat it. What's durian?
I don't know.
Fruit.
Durian fruit.
The fruit? Ferrari is tired, so she went to bed. Nice. It's a bad smelling fruit. That sentence only has one clause, but yes. I assume you were answering my question. I know what that is. Southeast Asian fruit, acquired taste. Yeah, I'll have to try it.
Well, maybe not. Nobody seems to like it.
Ashlyn needed to do her homework, so she did not go out to play. Very good.
Now,
And
let me just tell you, I find in general, kids write with a lot of independent clauses. They write very simple. I like basketball and I go to practice and it is hard and my coach is fun. And then I go home, period. Like, so what we do is we begin to circle all their conjunctions. In fact, I just did with a student of mine, we circled their conjunctions in colored pencil, okay? And then we would kind of worked on, let's just keep two independent clauses together and then put a period. So he would say, I play basketball and I go to practice. And then the next one, and then we would like figure out where all the punctuation goes. He puts the comma in, he identifies the pattern, independent, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent, period. We put in a period. And then that next one that was circled in the colored pencil, he's filled the whole circle in. So we got rid of that and then we started over again with the next two independent clauses with the and. Now, that isn't the most advanced sentence structures, but it is a start. Helped also him get some of his punctuation.
So be sure to double check your sentences you're creating with the mechanics that are listed at the bottom of that sort of cheat sheet we gave you on page 25. So if you've written two independent clauses, you cannot only use a conjunction. It needs to be a comma before that conjunction. Also, actually, the mistake I tend to find kids make more, they often will forget their comma before the conjunction, but they often also just put a comma. They've recognized that they've kind of created two thoughts, and so they'll put a comma and they forget the conjunction. So you might have something.
That happens too.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Like I like ice cream. I prefer chocolate. And they've separated them by a comma.
I like ice cream, comma, I prefer chocolate. I see both. It kind of depends on how much more advanced the writing. So I find when you're in this kind of simple writing where they're writing a lot of simple sentences, they might just keep putting a bunch of ands in between.
Yeah.
Then the more advanced writer is finally getting more complicated sentences, but they're putting commas in between everything.
Well, they kind of get this sense of like, oh, I need to throw commas in here to help separate things, but they kind of forget to apply it to the mechanics of what they've actually written, right? And what those rules are. So we go back to writing and practicing explicitly. So Rita kind of hinted that this kind of thing is great for going back and editing things that have already been written, but you also want to do a ton of practice just practicing writing this construction from the buildup. Like today, your writing job is to practice writing independent, comma, coordinate conjunction, independent, so that it becomes very habitual, that sort of, that format, those mechanics of
Yeah.
that.
Valerie asked a good question. I feel like for, as Morris said, is just this kind of more old-fashioned way. And I think we do use since more.
Yeah, we also use because as kind of
And
like
because, and also, I don't think it sounds very independent. I mean, if you just take for she needs the care we can provide, that doesn't sound like it's independent to me.
It's mostly good to know for if you're analyzing sort of text that has maybe an older vernacular, you might see that, right? Like if you're looking at something from Little Women, you'll likely see the use of the word for as a coordinating conjunction. So, it's
I mean,
good.
I think that's worth talking about in truth, I mean, no one wants to go back and rework the Ackerman fanboys. If you take 4 away, we're in trouble. But I agree. And boys.
And boys.
But it is very old fashioned and it does not sound independent to me a lot of the time. I've noticed that one more. And you know what? I just talk about that with kids. Like, people used to think this was independent because it doesn't.
To answer your question though, Valerie, a word like since or because instead of the word for creates a slightly different kind of clause, which we will get to.
Which we're about to talk about. So we're going to leave independent there because what we need to know about independent, that's kind of step 1. All right. And we're going to move on to page 23. And Maura is going to tell you about the other half of this, which is the dependent clause. And if you remember, I started out by introducing to kids that you could have a whole thought and a half a thought, even though we only practiced the independent at this point. I kind of gave them that overview that a half a thought, the dependent clause was coming. They know that, okay? And that's okay. Does that make sense?
Okay, sorry. Valerie's comments aren't showing up for everyone because she was just clicked on panelists. So, yep, there, she switched it now. So a lot of questions came through while you were chatting there. I think some of the questions being asked are about to be addressed. I hope people are saying things like adverbial clause for. Yeah. Okay. You know what? I think I'm just going to continue teaching, and some of this stuff is about.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what my peanut butter thing was. I eat peanut butter by itself, for I don't. Yeah, I'm not even sure
What was,
that's.
for example,
I
with
think when
for?
they used to use for, I think it was this old-fashioned kind of like
Or
thus.
As a young child.
Yes.
My mother had
There.
snapped
Tracy
her
just got. Well, no, as a young child.
Well,
It's
Well,
just
yeah,
like-
for as a young child.
my mother had smacked her every time she ate with chocolate.
Yeah, but as a young child,
It's just a phrase.
yes.
But you could say something like, I like peanut butter for it's nostalgic for me, or whatever.
Yeah, and I think too it was kind of like thus we must leave early.
To me, it's more
Or
like,
we must leave early. I think it just was very old fashioned,
yeah. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on. I think I'm just kind of looking through the questions and comments people had. A bunch came in at once, so
I'll be reading them and you
look
can
back through.
start on we're on page 23.
23. All right. So what I think it was Valerie maybe who had brought up this idea of for, and we said, yeah, it kind of can often be replaced more with a word like since or because, which drags us into this second kind of conjunction. And I actually, you know what, Mom, can you show the, like while I had a subpage just because yours is colorful and mine is black and white right now. So you'll notice we have two, or sorry, did I say conjunction? Second kind of clause. So we have two kinds of clauses. There's a lot of words we're tossing around here that all start with the same letters. So sometimes
Is this the one you're looking for?
different things come out of my mouth. Oh, it's kind of glary on that side, isn't it?
Yes. All of a sudden, I'm getting a
Oh,
glare.
that's a little bit better. This was on your page 25, so you can kind of flip there for a second. And you'll notice that the other side talks about a kind of clause we have which is considered to be half a thought. So independent clauses create a whole thought. I tell students a thought that can stand alone by itself if you want. And then we have on the opposite end, a clause that creates a half a thought, which we call a dependent clause. And if you want to talk about the meaning of words like independent and dependent, we create, you know, examples like if you're independent, that means you can do stuff by yourself, like an independent clause, all on its own. If you are dependent on something, that means you need someone else or you need something else. You're not completely on your own. So the label of dependent clause gives us kind of a clue. If you've only created half a thought, you need another piece to finish that thought, okay?
And you can kind of picture, you know, the kangaroo in its mother's pocket, dependent. It has to be attached, you know, to be complete. You know, the little monkey on its mom's back, you know, that these are things we can attach to independent clauses, but they can't yet go on their own, right?
So a dependent clause, what is difficult about dependent clauses, I tell kids, is that they still have a subject and a verb, because that was our definition of just a clause. Regardless of whether it's a dependent or independent, it has a subject and a verb. So dependent clauses become especially tricky because it can feel to kids like they've created a whole thought as long as they have a subject and a verb there. And they may that's much better.
Yeah.
They may struggle to recognize that their clause is in fact not a whole thought or half a thought. So what I often do is I create a few dependent clauses for them, and I have them tell me what word caused this to feel like it wasn't done. So what you'll see, I will come back to that list in a minute, but I'm going to have her stop sharing her screen for now because I'm going to share mine.
Okay.
I have so many things and I have not a very big desk, so I'm always kind of squooching around here. Oh, what did I just do? There we go. Okay. So I'm going to flip this here. I might write something like, I kind of write a few for my kids. If we go outside after you clean up, although I dislike durians, durian fruit. Durian.
Mm-hmm.
I-A-N. Okay. Although I dislike durian fruit, okay, and I create a few of these for them, and then we might even identify the subject and verb to notice that these are for sure clauses. They are at the very least a clause, right? We go. You clean up or clean, kind of depending on what you want to mark.
You can really appreciate why with older students, you've got to figure out this subject verb again, because you're not going to be punctuating correctly unless you, and you're not going to be understanding these independent clauses unless you know your subject verbs.
So I've identified that, yep, do we at least have a clause here? Have I just created a bunch of phrases, or do I actually have a clause? I do have clauses here. We go. You clean up. I like to include the verb particle there. I dislike, okay? So now I say, all right, but if we go outside, that doesn't quite feel like it's done yet, right? After you clean up, I just haven't really finished that thought. Although I dislike durian fruit. So I say, what is the culprit? What caused this perfectly good clause that has a perfectly nice subject and verb to feel like it isn't perfectly finished, right? What's the problem here? And they're like, well, it feels like it's this problem, right? Usually kids, my younger kids, I might have to help them. My older kids tend to go whoop, right to the right word. Okay, if feels like the word that caused this issue. After feels like the word that caused this problem. And if they're struggling to figure it out, I might help them. I might say, well, let's check out something. If I covered up this word, suddenly doesn't it feel fine? I dislike durian fruit. Oh yeah.
You think I was capable of it?
So this one is clearly causing the problem. So we've kind of identified these culprit words, and then I direct them back to our sort of second half of our reference page. So I'm going to have Rita show you that again because she has the nice pretty one. And we take a look at what we call subordinating conjunctions. So these are also conjunctions. They are conjunctions because they serve, that's okay, I'm still talking. They serve a purpose of creating a sentence that connects to something else, but instead of sort of appearing between two independent things, they attach onto a clause to create something that feels unfinished, which as a result needs a second thought, which is kind of how they achieve the connecting. But they don't feel like they create a connection. They more are feeling like they're part of a clause. So they're called subordinating conjunctions, but really they are what creates a dependent clause. It has to have a subject and verb, and it has to start with a subordinating conjunction word, which are all those words I circled on the example sentence. And you'll notice on our little reference sheet here, boy, that's a big long list. We have this sentence, like, wow, I ate a sub, which was our feeble attempt to try to come up with some way to organize all of the words that can serve as subordinating conjunctions at the start of a dependent clause. And I want to just say that I don't really have kids try to memorize this list. I'm not a big fan of trying to memorize lists of parts of speech. I just don't think that's very functional or helpful. And honestly, for struggling learners, they have enough memory struggles as it is, right? Just like with the prepositional phrase list, just like, I feel like there was another list we've shown you. Oh yeah, the helping verbs and linking verbs list. I really focus on, can we recognize it? Can we identify it based on us noticing how it's functioning in the sentence, as opposed to trying to memorize it? I could maybe use this chart to try to get most of them, if you asked me to try to memorize them and repeat them for you, but I'd probably miss a bunch. But am I always able to recognize one when I see it? Yeah, and that is more important. Rita has started sharing something.
Well, I was trying to get to a picture, but actually it's disappeared. Ugh.
We are currently looking at a screen full of pictures.
Yes, I know, but it's not the one that I had cropped. What I was trying to show you is, this isn't cropped. You see this little girl sitting on her stool at the bottom. But we had, in an effort to help kids, yes?
You can zoom into it.
I think, yeah, if you
Like
scroll your mouse, it might zoom in.
down at the bottom. There's a plus and a minus sign down at the bottom.
Oh. Go away, you little command there.
Might make it a little easier.
Ah,
There.
so,
There we go.
in order to help kids just get really used to connecting this with their verbal system, sometimes we will pick a topic, and then we'll just pull our subordinated conjunctions out of a cup. That's what the green cup you see there. And so she had to make sentences about, in this case, she was making sentences about Thanksgiving. And whatever she pulled out, she had to make an independent and then use a subordinating conjunction and a dependent sentence, and then she had to switch it around and make the dependent first, independent.
Well,
so if she had picked a word like since, I
hadn't quite gotten that far in talking about the mechanics yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had.
No.
I thought you were talking about trying to come up with identifying these.
I was just noticing what makes the clauses feel unfinished is where we were. So.
Okay.
But I mean, we can come
But
back.
you could still use this idea of pulling them out of a jar and then how that makes it feel unfinished. And it's just a way of helping them remember the words.
Well, recognize the words. Yes.
Mhm.
Yep. So I'm going to share my screen here, or actually Rita's already sharing hers. So I'll point out that when we have a dependent clause and we've identified that there are these sort of culprit words, these subordinated conjunctions that are the whole reason a dependent clause feels unfinished. What it creates is this kind of cliffhanger feeling, which requires, it's dependent upon a whole thought to finish that sentence or an independent clause. So if you look at the mechanics on the bottom of your reference page, your page 25, what Rita's showing you here, that shows you that if you have a dependent clause, your mechanics, your punctuation that's necessary is a comma following the dependent clause to show that it's not done, it's kind of this cliffhanger, and then an independent thought to finish it. But what Rita had showed you kind of in that example photo there is that if a dependent clause, if this construction is flipped and the dependent clause comes after an independent, the independent was already there and a dependent just kind of got tacked on, there does not need to be any punctuation between them. In fact, the dependent clause isn't even really necessary because we know that an independent clause can always just stand on its own. I could have put a period after an independent clause and just not had a dependent.
So, and actually in that sample I showed you, we actually weren't even writing them. We were creating them verbally so that she had a sense of, if I start with although there are 5 desserts at Thanksgiving, I only eat pumpkin pie. She had much more of a sense of how the dependent and independent work when you add a word to it, right? There are 5 desserts at Thanksgiving. I only eat pumpkin pie. Those are 2 independents. But when she had to say, although there are 5 desserts, then that is dependent and she needs that I only eat pumpkin pie.
So we're still on page 23, but I'm just showing you this sentence I pulled from one of the practice pages. And what I'm going to have you guys do is when you read this sentence, I want to see if you can identify whether what word is a subordinating conjunction, I should say. What word creates the dependent clause here? In this sentence. Very good. You didn't need to have your list. Maybe some of you did. But you didn't need to have your list in front of you to identify that the word when is creating this construction, this D, comma, I, right? Where we have, I know that's not really very dark. Sorry about that. Where we have a dependent clause that is depending on an independent thought to make it complete. And the way we can identify that dependent clause is by that word, that subordinating conjunction that causes all the problem. And I might also notice, always have kids circle if we see a comma. I might do this the opposite way. I might say, do you see a comma in this sentence? Yeah. So that is often part of a dependent comma independent construction. So let's go see if we feel like we see that. Let's double check. Maybe not. The comma could be there for a different reason. But let's double check. Oh,
You
yeah.
have to find a subject and verb to know it's a clause.
They might say, well, at least I have identified that I have a subject, Lamont, and a verb, watches. And then we might see, do we have a subordinating conjunction that makes that dependent? Oh, yeah, we do. And we can circle it. Okay.
Lonnie's question or comment?
On page 26, the comment to when. Oh, it's not missing. What Maura did there is you are supposed to fill in the answer on page 26, and Maura just used it as a sample
I
sentence.
used it as a sample, so I added the comma. But on page 26, which are your,
Because we want you to figure it out and figure out where to put the comma.
yes, if you read the big paragraph at the top giving you directions, it says add any missing punctuation in the sentences below. So,
But thank you for letting us know, because we do find a lot of little mistakes here and there. That one actually was on purpose.
that one's on purpose. Yeah. So I added the comma. So this would be if this was a sentence that we were looking
No
at that
problem.
was already written. Yeah. And then we would check on the other side of our comma. Let's make sure we have an independent clause. He, subject, forget.
Hey, Maura, can you go over that in another color? Because it's really not showing up very well.
Sure.
Just in case people are watching this later, they might have a hard time.
So when Lamont watches birds, comma, he forgets about the time. Now, at this point, if we've been doing grammar for a while, I'm kind of mostly invested in this clause construction, which is really based in these conjunctions and the subject and verb. And I may not really make kids mark everything else. If kids are really still getting hung up in all these other things in the sentence, then I might have them mark the other things. We have a direct object here. We have a prepositional phrase here, okay?
And if I'm helping them sort through these clause constructions, I also might have just bracketed off about the time, you know, as just in a way to help them find their subjects and verbs, you know. So again, you know, we always talk about this, we do it and working to a level of success. And so sometimes if we go ahead and create, you know, now we're focused at this new level, these clause constructions, so we can support them by marking off some of these phrases so they can find their subjects and verbs.
And I want to show you that, again, if you look at the bottom of our kind of clause reference page, we have another option for sentences that include a dependent clause, which is that the dependent clause may not be the first clause. It might come after an independent. It's hard for me to teach and write at the same time, but I'm showing you what this sentence might look like if we had it flipped, in which case you might notice that we do have a subject, we do have a verb here, we still have a subject and a verb over here, and we do have a conjunction, but now this conjunction appears to be more kind of looking like how the other conjunctions do, where it's sort of between two clauses, right? And you also no longer need a comma, and also this dependent clause is sort of optional. I could have just ended it, he forgets about the time. That's independent. But I wanted more information, so I added the dependent when Lamont watches birds.
So I put up another sheet here that just shows this kind of in a big way. Sometimes we'll draw this in, as we're learning it in our LA binder, that if you have half a thought before a whole thought, you need the comma. If you switch it around, the whole thought comes first, then you don't need the comma. Now, just something to be aware of, kids will write sentences with multiple clauses. So as soon as you have a dependent with an independent, you've kind of created a new independent. You may need a comma before another dependent. I mean, so once you start chaining them together, the comma usage can get a little tricky. But the thing, you know, just for your basic work that you're doing now with an independent and dependent, these are called complex sentences versus compound. Compound is when we had two independent clauses with coordinating conjunctions. They're complex when you have some dependent with when you have a dependent with an independent. And then we're using what's called subordinating conjunctions. And again, you have some good opportunity for word study words here, the independent, dependent, and then coordinate versus subordinate. So, you know, don't be afraid to pull out your word study lessons to kind of help kids understand some of this grammar jargon.
So I'm looking at some bugs here. If you want to go ahead and flip to page 24, there's a bunch of how we would put this kind of construction on bugs where you have a dependent and an independent clause. This is why I thought the leaves were, because every time we show them, we always show subordinating conjunctions on these guys, and we always show fanboys on these guys.
Huh.
But I don't know if we did that on purpose or not, but I always thought we did.
I don't think so.
Nope.
These ones kind of look like they're connecting more, and these ones, so what I have said to my students is I like using these leaves for the subordinating because they look a little bit like they kind of are connected to the bug, as opposed to these guys look very separated, and students get very confused about the subordinating conjunction actually kind of being part of the dependent clause. It's what creates the dependent clause. It's not sort of this separate thing so much. It is actually part of the clause, because without it, you have an independent. So with it, it makes it dependent. So I often use these sort of floopy ones that sort of have this stem that connects because it feels much more connecty as opposed to the fanboys ones, which kind of hang out on their own. And you can do it either way you want, but that's sort of something that some of my students have.
What's really important is that the log that's listed as dependent has to include that leaf.
Right.
Can't
So
just
I'll show you that here with one of these examples. So we might practice either building sentences in a notebook, just writing them, or building them on bugs. But there's many examples on page 24, but I'm going to go ahead and just make up my own. So one of the things we might do is I'd say, oh, let's look at our list of subordinating conjunctions and pick one. You can pick one to start with. So I'm going to do the example of since, because someone brought up this word earlier. And that is actually one of the subordinating conjunctions. So the reason we said that kind of created a little bit of a different clause is because if we replace the word for with a word like since, you've moved from something that might have been part of a independent clause construction to something that's now part of a dependent clause construction. So since I ate lunch, I'm just going to throw the word early up here. And if I had this on a marker board, we know we need a comma because we've created a dependent clause. I am full. Period. And then we can use our logs as these kind of great labelers. So, as Rita said, if you can, my logs are kind of small. But if you can kind of include your subordinating conjunction underneath that log label, we have a dependent clause. And down here, I know it's a little hard to see. If I can move that up slightly. We have an independent. We get that dependent, comma, independent. And I like to try to practice creating our own sentences and practice this construction. This, like the independent, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent, it's another place where kids really mess up punctuation because they kind of really, the reality is kids really don't have a great understanding of where commas go. They are often told early on that commas are just, you know, used to show a pause. And the reality is that that description is not helpful because some of us might feel like we pause there and others might feel like we don't. And the reality is some kids might pause and some kids might not when they should have. So telling them that, you know, it's just where you feel the pause isn't very functional in terms of their writing. So I have kids do a lot of practice creating either on bugs or in their composition notebooks, just writing sentences or both. We go back and forth, or on marker boards, whatever you want, practicing these constructions. And we use our reference page, that page 25. I'll have them pull it out and be like, which format are we practicing? Well, let's practice the dependent, comma, independent. Okay, that's what we have to create. And every dependent clause has to start with a subordinating conjunction. So let's pick one. And they pick one and they can write it on above. And then we know either to make a rest of our clause, it has to have a subject and verb. So let's pick a subject, pick a verb. If you have a direct object or a subject complement, you can put it on that bug butt or not. And then because it's dependent, we know we need an independent. So let's pick another subject and verb that feels like it follows our half thought to create a whole sentence. And we would practice just like that. Before we do some marking together, I'd love to have, just like Rita had you type in your practicing your independent, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent, I'm gonna have you do the same thing for this one. I'm gonna have you type in a sentence of your own that has dependent, comma, independent, period. And you can use your reference page on page 25 to kind of remind yourself of some of those subordinating conjunctions. Go ahead and type your examples in. So I might do something like, even though we've all right, that's mine. Whenever I think of you, I feel like throwing up. Uh-oh. After I eat dinner, I always like dessert. After she watched the grammar class, she bought a Rocket book. Yeah. Even though we've been teaching for hours, we still aren't done. Because I did not get enough sleep, I am drinking a lot of coffee. Yes. He was happy. Since it was his birthday today, Teresa, watch out for punctuation. Oh, no, that one's fine. No, you're right, because you flipped it. Good for you. You're fine, you're fine. Ignore my comment. Since I am tired, grammar is harder to understand. Here, here. After I went swimming today, I washed my hair.
Wherever you go, I shall go. I love that quote.
Yeah. What did someone write? What quote?
Wherever you go, I shall go.
Wherever you go, I shall go. Very nice. I like it. I like it. Now, keep in mind, sometimes subjects may not be repeated on the other side of commas, in which case you don't have a whole clause. So really pay attention to whether or not the clauses have a subject and a verb. That is why that's always kind of that basic component. Okay.
Nice one, Bryn. Okay. So
yeah, are we marking the big one?
do we get to that page of marking?
Yep, page 26, guys.
We're in the home stretch.
Home stretch, I know. Do you want to do it, or I have it written out? If
I have it too.
okay.
It's fine. You can do it if you want.
Alrighty.
First of all, while Maura's getting organized, take that first sentence there. Can you buy eggs before the store closes? So you need to decide if you need a comma or not. So the very first thing you'll do with that sentence is find a subordinating conjunction. Do you see one? Before, right? So you might want to circle that. So looking ahead of the coordinating conjunction or subordinating conjunction, can you buy eggs? So what is the subject? You. What is the verb? Can buy. And what is that's an action verb, so we're looking for a direct object, which is eggs. Good. So we know we have a subject and verb, and it feels like a whole thought. So we would say that one is independent or dependent.
Yep. Good
Can you
job.
buy eggs? Independent. So now after before, we have the store closes. What is, now we're looking for a subject and verb, okay? So what is the subject?
Store. Good.
Store. And what's the verb?
Closes.
Closes. So before the store closes, is that independent or dependent? Dependent. So we have an independent, dependent structure. Do we need a comma? No comma. Very good. So this is the kind of thing we exactly do with our kids all the time. Lots of them. So it is dependent because the before is a subordinating conjunction. It's attached to the clause before the store closes.
Yeah. So I always tell
Part
kids
of the clause. It is tricky.
it's tricky. The circling it sometimes still feels like you're separating it.
Yeah.
So what I say to kids is memorize the fanboys. Those can be memorized. They're not that many. And you can say fanboys, for and nor, but, or yet so. If it's not a fanboy and we think it's a conjunction, it's one of the other ones, which means it's part of that clause.
Right.
And it's dependent. So if it's not fanboy, so that's how I'll do it. I'll say, okay, now let's look at our conjunction. Is it a fanboy? No. So it's dependent.
Is that a prepositional, right?
Well,
Before can be a preposition. That's what they're talking about right now. So before can be a preposition, but because we've identified that this has a subject and a verb, it's
Oh, that's right.
Before the store closes,
Okay,
so that's
yeah,
fine.
that's the thing we have to keep remembering. A phrase doesn't have a subject and a verb, so before was acting as a makes you crazy. And I
No, but
always doubt myself. Whatever, like we had this marked, we'd already been through it, you know, but I see it again and all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, that's a preposition.
I
And
did
then you kind of
forget
have to
that.
go back and rethink, wait a minute, it had a subject and a verb. Phrases don't have both.
So
Lots.
and I actually I forgot to tell you guys, but I do always say to my kids, if I remember, of course, and I forget to say things to them too, but that there are several subordinating conjunctions that cross over on that preposition list. So preposition versus subordinating conjunction, function. Always ask, you know, what's it doing and is there a subject and verb, and our function questions, right? We know prepositions are groups of words, but they don't have both a subject and a verb, and they describe. Clauses always have a subject and verb. So if you see one of those words and you're unsure, just double check what comes after it. Does it have a subject and verb? Oh, it's a clause. So it's a dependent clause. Does it not? Then it's not. Might be a phrase. Okay.
I'm assuming that Linda had made a comment that Brandy's referring to about how getting kids to write this way makes their writing much more interesting. And it is really true. It does help their original writing become more interesting. Lots of times we'll take two independent clauses and we'll try to figure out how we could use a subordinating conjunction and make one of them dependent. And it does make their sentences more mature. Okay, so Maura's tackling the monster sentence at the bottom.
All right. So our
Again,
first job
Animal Farm.
is to scan, and you can use your cheat sheet if you need, and we're going to see if we can find any conjunctions, whether they are coordinating or subordinating, and circle them all. So any conjunctions you guys see, shout them out. I assume you guys are talking about this.
Yes, and Linda had made the comment that all those
When
independent.
after. Okay, yes. So we do have another when.
The dependents really do make sentences more interesting. A bunch of independent sentences are really
We
boring.
have kind of an and when. Yeah. Sometimes I would make that one big circle, but unfortunately it sort of split across my.
One thing I help kids, one that I do try to get them to memorize is when. When comes up a lot. There's certain ones that just seem to show up often.
We
When,
do
because,
Yeah. We do have the word after here, but I'm going to hold off on circling that one for now because it's one we may have to double check.
yeah, I still would circle it because it's there. Because it could be a prepositional phrase, right?
Yeah, but we don't circle prepositions.
Yes, but we don't know their prepositions till we analyze, right?
Okay, I was gonna hold off on circling it so I didn't have to erase it later, which will make me erase everything, but all right, sure. So we're gonna circle that because we think it's a conjunction. It's not though. Okay, so so we're looking at this and we've circled everything we think is a conjunction, and now we're going to work kind of from each conjunction backwards. So if I have a conjunction here, I'm gonna look before it and try to find a subject and a verb.
Oh, you do have a comma too. You might just want to circle the comma since we talked about that. Okay.
What is the subject and verb of anything that comes before this first conjunction? They had come. Okay, and actually if we want to kind of square, well, I don't know. Sometimes it depends on the student. Sometimes I might kind of square away everything in that before that conjunction, or we might just go through and find all the subjects and verbs. But we can kind of square away just to sort of work from top to bottom now that you guys are kind of in it here. Do you know what I might do with to a time?
Yep. Prepositional phrase.
Okay, so now we're after this conjunction and we're going to look in no one dared speak his mind.
Oh, Maura, sometimes at this point we begin to identify, okay, that had a subject and verb. It is a clause. They
Right.
had come to a time is independent. So we may make a bracket or we might
Yeah,
just start
I don't
writing
really
it at the bottom.
I know I don't have great space for bracketing
Yeah,
every
you don't.
clause, but
You
I
can
might
just put an I, yeah.
label an I off to the side, right? They had come to a time that feels like it can stand alone, so we're going to put an I there. All right. When no one dared speak his mind. Do we have a subject and verb? I think some people might have said, oh, no, not yet. When no one dared speak his mind. Where's our subject and verb in that portion?
It's arguable.
Yeah. Speak is arguable. It's probably an infinitive to speak, but
We haven't gotten to those yet. So
we haven't gotten to that yet.
I'll let them mark. If this was a student and I hadn't taught that, I'd let them say dared speak as
Yeah.
the verb for now. So I will assume, as you
Yeah,
are,
Tracy said that might be the right answer anyway.
the same thing. Yeah. Okay, no one dared speak. Good. What is his mind?
It's
Mhm.
direct object.
Very nice. Oh, not my
Mind is the object. Direct
I
object.
know, I was just about to pick up the wrong one.
No, I know. I was just,
And because of this word when, let's identify what kind of conjunction that is, and that will answer what kind of clause we have.
when no one
Kind of
dared.
clause is when no one dared speak his mind.
Dependent, they said.
People are writing Depp, like Johnny Depp. It's a Johnny Depp clause. All right. When fierce growling dogs roamed everywhere. Do we have a subject and verb here?
Dogs roamed.
Okay, how might we mark these other words there? What's fierce or growling? Right. What about everywhere?
Adverb, they're saying.
Okay. So what kind of clause was when fierce growling dogs roamed everywhere? Let's check out what kind of conjunction we have.
Or clause. Yeah.
What kind of, I did say clause, yeah.
Okay. Dependent, they're saying.
Very good. Okay. And when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces.
The and when is interesting because kids will see and they'll think, oh, wait, that is a coordinating conjunction, but it's put with when. It's really and when. So it really becomes another subordinating.
I think in these kind of situations, usually the second one ends up driving the type of conjunction. Because we have a couple.
And when, and
Yeah.
because.
We have a couple that we sometimes kind of combine like that. And you want to look at that second one. So when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces, what is our subject and verb here? Thank
you, Brandy, for acknowledging that this class should be split up. this is a discussion we have here at Rooted in Language, and you might guess by my response what side I'm on.
There are points in all directions.
Yeah, and at this point, to watch your
I think we're in
comma
the works for that, actually.
torn to pieces is phrasal for sure. From what we've learned right now, I'm probably going to bracket this entire thing.
So good point. It is a list of these subordinating conjunction, of these dependent clauses that we're realizing.
This is a kind of phrase we haven't really learned yet, but it is a phrase. So, you know, again, I'm realizing I sort of forgot. I might have bracketed this for my student before we started, right? But it is phrasal. Okay, now, after confessing to shocking.
You didn't mark that dependent, Maura. You didn't mark
I'm sorry. I forgot to ask you. Yep. What kind of clause was this when you had, and then
They're figuring it out. They said they can tell there's a series of dependent clauses.
Thank you. I just forgot to mark it.
Yeah.
And then after confessing to shocking crime. So this is a good kind of question because we thought this was a conjunction. So that would mean we have to have a subject and verb after it. Do we?
Do we have a subject?
No, we do not. So can it be a clause?
Wait, no.
No, it cannot, which means I unfortunately now have to do this annoying thing.
Sorry. Well, you just bracket the whole thing because now we know that after is acting like a prepositional phrase.
Yeah, okay, it's gonna look slimy. So we know after is also on our preposition list, which means after confessing. I could say it's just after confessing and then to shocking crimes. There's actually a second phrase there. Okay, so phrase and phrase.
So now if she begins to put down this pattern, she has I.
One sec. Gotta get my red. I.
Then D, and then a comma.
Comma. No, we had I-D-D, I think.
Nope, there's a comma after mind before the next D.
Oh, I missed that one. I didn't circle it. Thank you.
Huh.
I-D, comma.
D, comma,
E.
E, period.
Period. We do a lot of this kind of labeling the mechanics at the bottom so we can sort of piece out these large chunks in a sentence that's like, blah. It's a lot of stuff, okay?
And, you know, it's interesting because what, again, I go back to with kids that you have to kind of look at this independent in relation to these dependents. And in this case, you're preserving this punctuation of the independent dependent. Doesn't need a comma. But because we had a series of dependents,
They became a
we
list.
needed a comma.
Yeah, they became
And,
listed.
you know, the and there was actually, we would probably talk about that, was actually combining these clauses. These three dependent clauses, all starting with what word? When. Now just think about this. Later someday, a student is going to write constructions of clauses and just by chance, and they're going to kind of forget that clauses have to stay in these. When we have series, we need everything in our series to be kind of parallel. So saying when, it has a stylistic benefit in that we like things in threes. And it also preserves the same structure. When this, and when this, right? And so it just gives you an opportunity to talk about, you know, what the richness of a passage that you're analyzing and how the writer, when the writer says, there'd come a time when no one dared speak, when there's these growling dogs, when, what does that make you feel for these animals who are being ruled over by the pigs, right? There's a lot of mood and tone that comes from the writer's choice. So you begin to get into this play between the literary elements and the grammar, and how writers' style, you know, which is reflected in grammar, the writer's style and word choice and grammar structure, sentence structure, really builds into the mood of a text. When we were at ASHA, one of the things they were talking about, it's always nice when you go to a convention and they're talking about everything you've been doing and telling you how much the research supports what you've been doing, right? That's always a great feeling. And one of the things they were talking about is working at this sentence level and paragraph level and text level, right? We jump into these texts, and you've got to be looking not just at paragraph level, but at sentence level too, so you can work in both directions.
Amy I liked how she had labeled it. She labeled it ID, comma, D, comma, D, and D. Because the reason that and was there, as you all had discovered, is because those dependent clauses ended up being listed, and the last comma was an Oxford comma before the conjunction to connect the last piece of the list, which happened to be a whole clause. So as you can see that things like clauses and phrases are these huge chunks of words that end up almost acting like one piece of thing functionally, right? Like we can think of all those dependent clauses as being listed items, right?
Yeah, the only thing about the comma and dependent is it could make you feel a little bit like that became a coordinating conjunction. It is.
No, but I'm saying, I think that's part of why that and was there, and they are right. They're noticing these layering pieces.
Yeah. This is also another good reason why you just want kids using Oxford commas, because when you have clauses like that, you have got to separate those out by commas. It's way too complex. The reader would never know what the heck you were doing. You really need it. Yeah.
All right. I have to leave by 4:45, but we can go through. We only have a few questions in our Q&A, and we're done for today. We only want to do 4 through 6 for today.
Yep, we did. We'll do 7, 8, and 9 next on Friday. So if we have more questions, if you don't mind, we'll kind of save those. Okay.
Well, we have a few in the Q&A we can address.
Yes. So I'm in the Q&A. Can you remind us of the order you go through when labeling a sentence? Like 1, look for conjunctions. 2, bracket preposition.
I think I did that. I don't know when she typed that question, but in the middle of the class today, I put up.
And then I think Claire did answer it too, right, Claire?
Yeah, it was
But generally it's just for reference again here, it's conjunctions, then subject and verb within each clause. So you would find conjunctions and then look before each conjunction to try to find a subject and verb. And then you can also sort of reconcile anything else within that clause. Like after you found the subject and verb, you can look for direct objects, subject complements, phrases that are within those.
But you don't have to if that feels like a lot for your student. You can just
could just kind of stick with clauses, conjunctions, and then subject, verb, subject, verb, subject, verb. Okay.
And then you identify, is it a whole thought or half thought?
And label your mechanics.
And you label that that clause as independent or dependent. Like you decide and you label it. And then we write all of those clause pattern. We write the clause pattern at the bottom. And then we look at our chart and we decide on our punctuation. So just like we did in the last one, we wrote I, D, comma, D, comma, D, period, right? So if we hadn't punctuated it, like your practice sentence you're going to do on page 26, I do recommend you do those in the next couple days if you can. We have not punctuated for you. So your job will be to find your subordinating or coordinating conjunctions, circle them, decide if you have an independent, dependent, no need for a comma, or dependent, independent, need for a comma. And if you remember, that's at the bottom of your
Cheat sheet clause page.
Yeah, your clause page, right down here. Okay.
Okay, so I think we got question 1. Ashley's question, I think, will be a great one for you to go post in the Rooted community. He said, how do you store all your bugs and stuff? We need to have a social media post so everyone can show their different ways of storing. Yep.
Sorry,
Post that question in the Rooted community, And I'm sure people will post pictures and share how they store their bugs. That would be a great place for that. That's the
So-
Facebook group. But Rita can show you. She bought this like funky thing.
So we have this. Okay.
Oh, I thought you were going to show your like trough thing.
And where I had a trough, I think I took a picture of that, but where's our little, oh, right here.
Yeah.
Claire picked this up. We took this to Asha with us.
Oh, you gotta look it up a little bit.
Sorry, just that one didn't want to fit in. Okay, sorry, I gotta remember where my camera is. So I can lay all these down and then we can travel with them if needed, or move them around the office depending on where we're seeing our students. So that's another thing that would work. Did you get that at Target?
We want more of those.
I would say yes.
And that's from like Office Depot.
So
Or, like,
I had,
stuff like that at the Container Store too. Those are good.
so she said, you answered my first question, but to add on, do you only bracket prepositional phrases at the beginning when working with younger students? In your order, you have it as the last thing to do.
Well, I think I had said this in the chat at one point, but you may have noticed that prepositional phrases is there's kind of two ways to answer a question depending on what you're asking. But prepositional phrases is the most flexible piece, teaching concept that can kind of be moved around. In this class, we teach it before we teach clauses. But you'll notice that in the Big Bug Grammar curriculum, I think it's not until Big Bug Grammar 3 and clauses is Big Bug Grammar 2. So phrases get moved around kind of depending on the need of the student and what you think your student can handle and whether or not they, can understand prepositional phrases. Or sometimes with older students, we try to get to clauses quickly. So clauses ends up being first, and then prepositional phrases get kind of peppered in after that because clauses are so important for writing and editing and writing complexly and etc. So that's kind of the most flexible thing that gets moved around. So you may notice that sometimes we're teaching it before clauses, sometimes after. And then if you were asking more about when we bracket them in kind of the order of marking, if we haven't yet taught them, I bracket them ahead of time before the student is marking things so they can just kind of ignore them. They know that anything in the prepositional phrase is not going to be subject, verb, direct object, subject, complement. It's not going to be those main kernel pieces. And then in our order of teaching, once they've learned them, it tends to be conjunctions. Then you're looking for subjects and verbs in each clause. Then you're looking for direct object or subject complement, and then prepositional phrases. You can sort of, if prepositional phrases are in the way before a direct object or subject complement, sure, bracket prepositional phrases as you see them. It doesn't have to be, it's a little flexible after you've circled conjunctions and you've marked subject and verbs. Then the rest is flexible. I basically say reconcile the rest of what's in that clause, whether it's direct objects, subject complements, prepositional phrases, adjectives, adverbs, reconcile that stuff, right? And then you move on to your next clause. That's kind of the order.
So also, if a student hasn't yet learned prepositional phrases, then we were just bracketing for them. And then once they learn it, but I have to say sometimes I just do it anyway for them to just kind of get it out of the way so they can focus on other things. So.
If it's kind of too much for them to handle.
Sometimes it's just too overwhelming. I really want them to, as Maura had said before, just really focus on the clause, the punctuation. So we're just looking for subject, verb, and me getting some of the prepositional phrases out of the way is helpful. Plus I'm modeling every time I bracket one of them. It's like, oh yeah, that's a prepositional phrase. It kind of helps them get used to what they look like. So. All right, can you explain how you use the bugs when teaching students online in terms of camera and seeing what they are doing in modeling? I see Claire just explained.
Oh, Claire answered in the comments.
Yeah, we do.
Typically would require document camera on both ends.
Yeah, basically that's the only way.
Necessary.
That kids just need to have a document camera. Is there anywhere to get more examples from? I feel like I need to have the answers to refer to.
All the answers to all of our examples are in the back of your instructional plan. So you'll notice after you get through whatever our last level is, 8 or 9 or something like that, it starts being answer keys to everything in 8 or 9. We have noticed a few errors here and there. I actually forgot to point those out there was an error in the answer key on something.
42. Page 42.
On page 42. Oh yeah, on page 42, we just got rid of the first part. We had kind of labeled it incorrectly and realized that, and it's also a very complex answer. So on page 42,
Yeah, Maura had done the sentence and she just crossed out that beginning part.
it was the sentence that started with the, I'll hold it up here. This one. Okay. This sentence was on one of our levels. I don't remember, but on page 42 has the answer. Just cross out the first part of that sentence. Breakfast was an hour later because we didn't analyze
Having
it.
a big debate, which led to a big discussion, which got us being non-functional. And
Well, and we're pretty sure either way we had analyzed it incorrectly in the answer keys. So just cross that out. That's not really correct.
Ray, I don't know if you have our bugs grammar 1, 2, and 3, but there are some sentences in there. They, though, are not as complex as the sentences we've been practicing on. But one thing I will say is Rooted Community shares sentences and analyzes them often. That I would say that and word study are the two things the Rooted Community does the most. So we have a private, or it's not private, yes, it's a private Facebook group, sorry, but anyone can join, called Rooted Community. And if you aren't already in it, I would say do join it, because you can just put up a sentence from a piece of text that you want to analyze, or sometimes people will say, hey, can anyone give me examples of this type
Kind of construction, yeah.
Yes, people talk in Rooted Community all the time and share about grammar. So if you would like, go to the Rooted in Language Facebook page, and can you put in Rooted Community and then just request to join?
Yeah, if you just in the search bar search for Rooted Community, you should find it, but also it's listed as one of our groups. If you go to the Rooted in Language Facebook page, it's listed as a group, and then you can request to join there. And I think Brandy also just posted the link in the chat. Very helpful, Brandy. And if it might take a couple hours for me to notice your request and accept you, but within 24 hours you'll be approved, and then you can join the group and start asking questions.
Right. I have another hour and a half of a class coming up at 5 o'clock, so I am going to say goodbye as well.
I have another client starting in 5 minutes. So I am going to say goodbye as well.
Goodbye to all of you, and we will see you Friday. We'll try to get the video recording out as soon as we can.
Yeah. Give me a
Bye,
day.
everybody. Thanks so much.
Bye.